a politician in this country. Promises that vanish in thin air.
They closed the border.
Plantains couldn't get across.
Let's blame this whole thing. COVID-19 has had tremendous
promises
impact
that were made
on people's
yesterday.
livelihoods.
People can't even eat a proper breakfast.
Promises that were made yesterday cannot be
terrible.
fulfilled.
Supply chain constraints. I mean, let's blame it on COVID.
Transport, curfew.
Yes.
You know,
So when
borders
I
have been
collapse,
closed.
when I collapse in the middle of this show,
You won't collapse. Far be it from you to collapse.
due to hunger,
Never.
Ebu, don't do that. Then people start saying, there's COVID in spice.
you know, is it contagious via the airwaves? By the way,
I'm no longer tuning into this station.
yes, they have
Why?
COVID.
Chunga sana. So, Ndu, what happened?
Sorry. Good morning. first
supply
of all.
chain
I
constraints,
just
right?
greet me first now. Hold on.
Good morning. So, what happened?
Your country people are being let down here.
Plan was something exotic. No, truly.
Yeah.
And this stuff is just not readily available because of geographical, location.
Let's do a Wanjiru Gikonyo. As David D said,
The problem
COVID
with
has
the
affected
government.
supply and what else?
Demand.
Demand.
But in this case, there was demand.
Not sufficient. Yeah. Hey, anyway, welcome guys. Lovely to have you on the final day of the week. So now we are doing triple digits,
Yeah,
when you're doing our COVID. This is serious.
Well, now is when you're getting worried.
These are the Kenyans we were talking about. Until they have seen somebody collapse next to them, they'll keep
Before that, it's
I'm
not
just
a
quoting.
problem.
I'm just
Yes.
quoting Mutahi Kagwe. This is serious.
This is serious.
Yeah.
It's been serious from
been
the
serious
get-go.
from
the point it
December
was declared a
last year.
pandemic. It was serious.
Yeah. It's still serious. So the seriousness now is that because we are reporting more than 100 people testing positive daily out of around 2,000 tests.
Interestingly enough, the numbers that came out yesterday were more than the ones that came out the day before, and there were less tests done in the last 24 hours recorded yesterday. So that's interesting to note. At least 40 more people with less tests having been carried out the day before. So I think that's an interesting point. Dr. Amoth again did say that by August, September, we'll be getting to 200 per day. It's likely that with more targeted testing, we'll be getting to 200 a day before August. Right? So it's expected. Again, the problem being that a lot of people still have the attitude that it's not that serious, and then might be positive and taking this virus to people who would suffer a little bit more if they got it.
What are we likely to see then? So now we are seeing there's widespread community transmission. Okay.
Yeah. And more people are going to get it.
And more people are going to get it. You can get it. I can get it. I mean,
We can all get
we
it.
can all get it. Right? So what's going to happen? We are exposing more and more. We're exposing the more vulnerable people.
This is a problem, right? So more and more vulnerable. But by virtue of the fact that you have more people then being tested positive per day, the likelihood of them affecting the more vulnerable then increases. And this has been the message that they've been trying to put out from the very beginning. How I wish that it would have been put out a little bit clearer. I don't know if it would have changed people's attitudes, but then the reality would have been front and center and nobody would have to think about it. Because then just doing a spot check and talking to a couple of people yesterday, people had an aha moment. Oh, I get it now. What it means is that the more and more people that have it, or at least the awareness that more and more people have it, makes you realize that, all right, I could be taking it to somebody who would suffer a great deal if they actually did get it.
Maybe the thing would be to tell the story of the 55 who've died.
Perhaps. Unfortunately, the gory or the morbid tends to have a lasting effect when you tell it that way.
Because if we look at the profile of the 55 who've died, maybe then we can start interrogating that even further and say, were they vulnerable? Were they in that category of the people that we are saying, the vulnerable people? What was, the progression to their death from the point they tested positive or from the point now COVID started really affecting them?
Yeah.
Was their pre-existing condition a factor, a huge factor? Was it not? Then all those things, then you can start now putting that picture together, because probably still there's widespread community transmission. There's the possibility of it going to the vulnerable people. But then there could also, just like we've been saying with everything else that we're seeing in Africa, there could also be something different about the vulnerable people.
I think possibly this idea that they are vulnerable people, this could be part of the problem, because much as there are people who are predisposed, it doesn't mean that because I am fully healthy, I can't get an attack of COVID that will then put me down and possibly kill me.
Yep.
This virus is that unpredictable. And I think in our messaging, when we say vulnerable and then we imagine, well, if I'm in the informal settlements and I'm more vulnerable because of I can't social distance, I think these notions are being proven false, because once you get it, you get it. And you don't know how it's going to react. So I think one is this idea that was created from the get-go, that there are those who are more vulnerable than others, has been part of the problem. But obviously, social communicators would have to sit down and do what you're doing.
But I think
It
now
is proven. It is
vulnerable
proven,
doesn't
but
just necessarily go to people who live in
It's not-
informal
it's not
settlements.
economic
Vulnerable
vulnerability.
is actually physiological in this sense.
Yeah,
Older
predisposed.
people who immunity is not so high, and previously younger people also put in the vulnerable space. So children. And then much older
Agreed.
people whose immunity has
Agreed. Well,
is-
children are not necessarily in the vulnerable group, because in fact they're found. I thought
Initially
children are
they were,
found.
Initially
and
they
then
were.
Yeah, but they're found to be more resistant
Yeah.
because they get lots of flus. And in fact, if you get your flu from a child, then woe unto you, because their level of resistance is a bit higher.
Yeah.
But maybe in the social communication, and I as you were talking, I went back to something we struggle with, because we do civic education and we keep asking ourselves, so why do Kenyans reinforce these bad habits? Paulo Freire, I won't quote David D today, but Paulo Freire talks about empowering education. And there's a way that you educate people so that they own the problem and they own the solution. So that you don't bank. Banking is where you give messages that you've already processed and you expect people to be a blank slate that just take this information. Empowering education is where you communicate to people at a level where they internalize and they then translate that information in their own context. And perhaps there's a need to take a step back and say, look, we are dealing with a situation that we don't know. And if I am in Old Town Mombasa, Eastleigh, Kilimani, Kileleshwa, Kawangware, I will perceive the messages coming out through mainstream media and interpret them differently. If you go into the deaths around COVID, you're likely to stigmatize. There's some people who will take this from a stigma point of view and actually escape. Say that I want to have nothing to do with this. I will not be tested. So we might. I go back. I am a big believer. In people owning their own development, and part of this means that people need to understand what's at stake and come up with solutions. Then the antidote to what we are doing now is the community-based dialogues, where there's community health workers, there's youth who are on the ground. It's about how can we reach people right now and have conversations, much as there is remoting, even if people are going to stand in a scattered whatever, or you will speak to them via SMS. We need to innovate and have conversations that, make somebody question, okay, so if I get this virus, it means that, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my kids? So that they internalize. Otherwise, whatever we are doing actually has a lot of hit and miss. And we are not prepared, really, to think about the science of this and, the practicalities of this. And I think that there's a gap in our communication. That's my take.
Yep, and then maybe they were just trying to overcomplicate an issue. People understand things directly. I mean, you see something, you understand, you interpret, you see that floods are coming, then your instinct kicks in, you know what you need to do, you'll remember a story you're told by your parents, your grandparents of what had happened in their time, and you basically just move with the time. But I hear what you're saying, and probably it's about time that we started thinking about how else can we pass on the information and the messaging so that people just know this is what I need to know, this is what I need to do, and I need to survive.
In fact, empowering education came about in health service delivery because they found that people don't make rational decisions when confronted with facts about illness, whether it's AIDS or whatever else.
But I think
so we need to go back and ask, because we are, there is a sense where this pandemic caught government off guard and messages were then being churned out. So maybe just a slight step back, and it doesn't mean it's a very difficult process to do. It's just thinking about, how did we tackle AIDS? How did we get people to use condoms when they have a cultural, social stigma to this?
Because the communication with HIV/AIDS was extremely simple and it was targeted, and they were able to do that very well. There's so many things surrounding HIV and AIDS, for example, but they were able to take it and break it down into 3 simple, succinct lines that people remember until today. And if they were able to follow those 3 things, they were essentially able to keep AIDS at bay, keep the infections of HIV away.
Has that happened in your view with COVID?
No, it hasn't, because it's still early days. The messaging for HIV came after quite a number of people had died.
So do we have
to... learning experience.
No, we don't have to wait, however.
So the point
but
is...
one of the things I've been saying from the very beginning of COVID is that we had a unique opportunity because people were not dropping off and dying in the way they did with HIV. So there was a unique opportunity for the communication to be very clear from the beginning. Because even if we did not know, and we still do not know the many things about this disease or about this virus, there are certain things we do know. And that should have formed the simple communication that started from the beginning. Messaging, unfortunately, has been changing. And with anybody who knows anything about communication, is that you can say something, but until it is understood by the other party, it is not communication. It's something else. But communication is a two-way thing. I say something, the manner in which it is received, and then feedback is derived from that. That is when you have a complete communication process. But before that, it's just choirs singing.
So there's possibly
exactly
a 20%. I don't know how much the government is spending on their communication.
Neither do they.
yeah, possibly. So there's a step they need to take back, do this processing,
absolutely,
and then reproduce effectiveness in their communication. That can turn ahead, because Kenyans have to own this. Right now, Kenyans have not owned it. They believe it. It's anything but their disease.
Is it their disease?
Of course it is. When you're sick and
I actually
infected.
don't think anybody has, but we'll talk about that more.
22 minutes after 6. Let's take a break and then look at weather and come back to this conversation. Good morning.
(24/7) around the world, non-stop. This is Spice FM. Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah!
You're listening to Spice FM.
All right, let's take a look at what it looks like around the world and this Friday morning. I'll start off in Nairobi. 25 degrees is what we'll see as a high today, lows of 12 with only partly cloudy conditions through the day. Nyeri is cloudy at 16 degrees. A chance of showers starting really early are quite high. 23 the high and lows of 13. In Nakuru at 14 degrees, it'll be a wet afternoon going into a wet weekend as well with highs of 24 and lows of 13. 13 degrees and partly cloudy in Eldoret. It's going to be a wet afternoon as well, highs of 22 and lows of 12. It's 21 degrees and mostly cloudy in Kisumu. Rain's coming in later on with highs of 28 and lows of 19. Kakamega will be mostly cloudy this morning and open up into an afternoon of rain with highs of 26 and lows of 16. Malindi at 27 degrees is partly cloudy, and at 29 degrees being the high, it'll be a wet afternoon. Mombasa at 26 degrees is mostly cloudy. That'll be the condition throughout the day with highs of 30 and lows of 24. Kampala at 21 degrees, mostly cloudy, highs of 26 with showers expected later on in the day. All right, in Dar es Salaam, it's mostly cloudy at 23. It'll be a warm afternoon with highs of 31. Take a look down into Johannesburg, where it's a little warmer today at 5 degrees. Currently, it'll be sunny conditions all through today, however, with highs of 18 and lows of 3. Lagos is cloudy at 26 degrees. Partly cloudy conditions will ensue through the day with highs of 32 and lows of 26. All right, let's take a look into Paris, where at 15 degrees it'll be clear skies all through today with highs of 25. And in London at 12 degrees, clear skies all through today. Sunny conditions with highs of 22 and lows of 10. And we'll take a final look into New York, where it's still almost midnight and hazy conditions. Fog is going to be quite low today in the Big Apple. Highs of 23 and lows of 19.
Past 6, this is a situation room. It's kind of the biggest conversation in the room.
Spice up your life. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
Sure. All right, so we're inching very close to 6 million cases in the world now, and at 5,905,415. That's what we have now, and it's likely to see that the weekend will tip us over 6 million in terms of global figures. We still have good numbers. Well, it's slowly running away, but good numbers of recovered cases of 2,579,691, and that's what we see. The United States tipped over the 100,000 mark of deaths a couple of days, actually, about 28 hours ago now. So there are 103,330 deaths. By far the highest number of deaths recorded in the world. And we saw some reports coming out yesterday that, again, the African American community seems to be the hardest hit by the deaths and also by critical cases of COVID in the United States. It's been linked to lifestyle diseases. It's been linked to, again, these pre-existing conditions that we've seen, mainly heart conditions and then endocrine conditions. So the diabetes, high blood pressure, and patients who had stroke or were likely to have strokes, heart attacks, things like this. Okay, so that's what's happening in the US. And again, even after Fauci talked about them reaching plateau a month ago, that still has not happened. Brazil still up there with 438,812 cases with 26,000 deaths. Now, Russia, again, still up there with very low numbers of deaths. Spain, UK, still up there above 200,000 cases and then ranging around 10% of their deaths. All right, so we saw some news yesterday coming out of Sweden. Sweden, having been now said, has the highest number of deaths per capita in the world. Now, this is according to the numbers. Exactly. We didn't really look at it because we see that the numbers are still comparatively quite low, right? We're not looking at the 200,000, 100,000. Sweden has 35,727 cases with 4,266 deaths, right? So when they do a comparison to the total number of cases, then compared now to the number of people who are resulting in death, it has the highest numbers in the world, all right?
And
now,
their population.
Compared to their population, of course, percentage. The interesting thing, though, about this is that according to law, Sweden cannot enforce any kind of what they call draconian laws upon their people. They can make suggestions, but they cannot demand, they cannot insist unless it is changed in the constitution. So this is why we saw that they did what they did, whereby they were urging people to, maintain social distance, issues of sanitization and hygiene, etc., etc. But in terms of issuing or instituting a lockdown in the country, the constitution forbids them from doing such a thing unless it's war, literal warring conflict. So they were not able to do something like this.
They didn't, even though they didn't attempt to do something like this.
The constitution doesn't allow them to.
Well, the initial messaging from Sweden, if I got it right, was that they wanted to take the herd immunity approach. So they may have sat down and said, well, given our scenarios, it seemed to be a philosophical approach. Even the UK did the herd immunity. And they have the ability to declare a partial state, it's not emergency, but to suspend rights and to enforce a lockdown. So Sweden tried an approach that didn't work. It's interesting now that this emerges as part of the concerns, but they didn't from the get-go urge people to lock down. They said we have very nuclear setup. If people are forced to stay, to stop, to enforce social distancing, it will lead to psychological impacts. In fact, they didn't even say economic, it was a psychological. And they said, given this, we'd rather go with the herd immunity approach, ensure that people are able to continue interacting safely. So what would be interesting to study in Sweden is, did people social distance?
Yes, they did.
And they because we imagine there are more
people listened to their government. They did. Yes.
So they social distance.
Yes, they observed the measures.
What does this tell us about opening up?
The issue here is, I think, even what the story is talking about is comparing the per million.
It's per million.
Yeah.
No, we get it. But the per million is valid because the per million is how you compare your different approaches. You don't go with the total number. So Sweden right now, you're saying, has the highest
death rate per day per million, if you look at the per capita.
Wow, of course you need more statistics. Is it an age factor? What is their infection rate? Because usually you learn a lot from the infection rate. The death rate then you get into how many predisposing, what's the quality of critical care. So what's their infection rate? And then what are the lessons for us as we say, let our children go back to school, much as we seem to have a different virus.
So you can imagine, per population of 1 million people, Sweden has case
5
infections.
People dying a day.
5 people dying per day. 3,540 people per million are infected.
What?
Yes.
Per million.
Okay.
Per million. Yeah. So the total number may be smaller because their population is small.
Population is small.
But it's still, that's a very high rate of infection.
Yeah, it is. So you can imagine a country that has 10 million people.
And these are disciplined social distancing people.
Yes. With a country of 10 million people, this is what you have.
But when I see this story, yes, there's this side of the statistics of looking at things per million, and then there's also the other side of also looking at the R factor. How many people is one person infecting? Because that's the other thing that has to be considered. If one person gets it, how many people are they likely to infect? Is the R factor in Sweden higher than in other countries? Because the numbers in Sweden are low. Yes, the population is low, but also the numbers are low. The deaths are considerably low as well. People have observed all those measures that have been put up by the government. They have been told, observe social distancing, personal hygiene. They're doing all those things and they know what they're supposed to do. But, of course, people are going to die. So I think this is one side that's been brought out. It will be interesting to see whether it matches everything else that's studied around COVID.
I think it also has lessons for us as we open up. because if they did observe social distancing, if we assume they have pretty good critical care, they may have some predisposing factors that aren't being reported here.
Yep.
Maybe inordinate number of elderly or whatever. So, but for me, the issue is, what do we learn? What of course, you can't compare. Scenarios are different, but they retained social distancing. They retained. They continued working. They continued interacting, but observed all these measures. Yet it doesn't seem to have worked.
Let me tell you what has worked, and it's very clear for us. Look at the two countries, glaring examples of Uganda and Rwanda. From the get-go, they locked down. It was not a matter of let's have a conversation and let's look at your rights and let's look at protection. No. Lock it down. The minute you heard about the first case, they locked it down. Will we provide food for those who need it? Yes, we'll provide it. Let's lock down for a period of time so that we can make sure we curb this thing. No deaths in Rwanda.
Containment
no
measures
deaths
have
in
worked.
Uganda. They've contained this thing, and people will say maybe they're not testing. Highest number of testing in Africa, in Uganda and Rwanda. So it's
So
clear.
they got it right.
They got it right from
they,
the very
they went
beginning.
the South Korea.
Not
China
a question
route.
of, oh, well, I think I should be able to.
Rwanda has
No,
started
no.
reopening now.
And
People are
Rwanda
going
is
to
starting
work
to
like
reopen.
3 days a week now.
Uganda has set out measures for children to go back to school, and it's clear what they're going to be able to
So
do.
it was the containment in the first instance.
Yep.
Very beginning.
So
Even
stop the
Ugandans,
spread,
even
stop the community
Ugandans coming
spread.
home were turned away from their borders because they didn't know where they were coming to or where they were coming from and what they had. You're not allowed. Even Ugandan citizens were not allowed to come back into Uganda.
So this is what
So
was
they were
happening
very
to our
serious from the
truckers
very beginning.
at the border.
Yep.
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 So they prevented the community spread.
From
We
the
have the
beginning.
community spread,
Yes.
and all indications are
So
It
they
gets
had
to the community, it goes.
They had
That's it.
imported cases, just like you're saying. So the imported cases that already had come into the country, that they couldn't do anything about. But from that point, they said,
contained
we
it.
are going to contain this thing. So nobody's coming in. It doesn't matter what. And you saw the president being very vocal about, you want to exercise? I'm showing you in my office. Let me show you how you can exercise indoors.
Yes, we
They're
saw
talking
him.
about how long 2 kgs of maize meal can go. Let's cook
Let
it and
me
I
show
show you
you.
here how long it can actually take you. And we're going to assume it's a family of 4. So I think in this case, they've been very practical and they've been able to say, look, the other countries where we talk about, okay, let's just talk to our people. What are we seeing now? Highest number of death rates in the world. Children want to go back to school in France and Germany, infected all
Even
over
though,
again. Even the ones that we tout as the leaders in
Let me
development.
tell you something.
I
Small
don't
African
agree
countries
that,
give
that
us the example.
human
President
rights
Uhuru
is not
Kenyatta
the
had
problem.
done what
If who?
these two guys are doing.
If who?
President Uhuru Kenyatta, if he had done what Museveni is doing
Which
and
is
what
what?
Paul Kagame
Which is
has
what?
done, which is order everybody to stay indoors. These guys, civil society, would have come
I'll
out
tell
to
you,
talk about rights. You have to
Civil
involve the
liberty.
people. You have to involve the people. This decision you cannot just make from State House. You have to go to the people and talk to the people first.
Public participation.
You know,
You
this
would
is
have
the
had public
problem of eating the
participation.
wrong breakfast. Then you come out with views that are very skewed. You needed plantain to hold. Let me tell you, my good example of a very strong lockdown that respected human rights is South Africa. South Africa, of course, they had quite high exposure.
Yep.
In fact, they reported their first case about the same time we did. Their numbers went much higher because they started testing immediately.
Yep.
But they were very decisive and they locked down. I mean, they were so serious, they even stopped the sale of alcohol.
Yep.
Because what happens is when you have a pandemic, it's a big thing. South Africans drink more than Kenyans, and that's saying a lot.
I was going to say they even stopped it in Kenya, but voila.
They didn't stop the
They
sale
didn't
of
stop the sale of
alcohol.
alcohol.
In South Africa, they stopped the sale of alcohol. As in, people
We
are
did a story
brewing.
here of,
People now buy
the-
fruits to
that
brew.
brewer, Subco.
Yeah.
Subco is actually throwing away millions of liters of alcohol because they had already started brewing
Yeah.
and now they cannot distribute, they cannot sell.
Right. Now, the point is, South Africa was very resolute, very consistent, and they've had some human rights excesses by the police, but for the most part, they did it through on a human rights basis. The courts remained active. In fact, civil society activists have gone to court to sue on this and that. But the point here is human rights is not inimical or opposed to discipline, because when you impose a pandemic, there are certain rights that you suspend. The right of assembly is suspended, and there are rights and directives that government can issue. So the problem is not human rights. The problem is the consistency. Now, what South Africa had that we didn't have, first of all, their leadership, and this is linked to they have a very high prevalence of HIV. So they have a large population that's highly predisposed, and their health system is very, very strong because it deals with this. They also had a better economic situation because their economic management is better. Their community level health service provision is better. Their community level structures are better. They have very strong and active local authorities that are present. So their governance setup is much more advanced than ours in that regard. But their leadership was decisive. They did not violate human rights. They used a human rights framework and still managed to contain the people. So my point is, it's about leadership, it's about clarity, it's about decision, because Nairobi shut down, but it never stopped.
People were willing to obey.
People were willing at the outset.
Yes.
People were willing.
If the government had actually told people stay indoors, people would have stayed indoors. Like, don't come out, people would have stayed indoors at that point.
But then you tell people who have to go out every day to eat,
now that's
stay
the other argument.
Indoors.
That's what made the government not go that far. Because people started talking about, if you tell people to stay indoors, what are they going to eat?
But it's true.
Can you think people in Uganda are not eating?
Hey, let me tell you about Uganda and Rwanda.
It's the same thing that people in Uganda and Rwanda started asking, what are we going to eat? The government said, I'm going to bring you food.
You know why the Uganda and Rwandese governments were able to respond? Uganda has Nyumba Kumi that works. Rwanda has a system, it's called Ubudiwe. We looked at it at some point because it's a very... So they have village level governance like they have in Makueni. Makueni has it. So it's very easy then to distribute food because you already have a structure. Now in Kenya, because of the politics, unfortunately, we do not have community structures, number one. Number two, government of Kenya is broke. People think it's a joke. Government of Kenya is broke because it's paying debt. So the first thing this government needed to have done is, one, say we are suspending all debt repayments. All our money is going towards COVID. They did not do that. And this is the point that, really baffles.
Even without all that, it would have been possible.
With all you're saying, this government
to lock
is
down
still...
and feed people for a
they
while.
They don't have money.
It would have been possible. What do you mean they don't have money?
Hold on.
They do have money.
Hold on.
It would have been possible.
What are you saying?
Even if you're talking about people contributing, 3 billion shillings has been contributed by Kenyans to a fund for COVID.
Hold on.
It would have been possible
if
they came down and said, this is how much we have, this is what we can do.
You're being emotional.
And immediately...
Be factual.
No, factually.
70 billion to feed 6 million households,
study by the Senate
excluding
Committee.
yours.
According to the study,
where is the
by
70
3
billion?
months, if we had locked down immediately, people would not have required food immediately. We spoke to people. People were calling us. There's a friend of ours who calls in from Kibra. He says, you guys keep talking about, the people who eat on hand to mouth a day. Those people know how to live a day. It doesn't mean that every day they go out, they come back home with food.
The food in their hand.
But they know how to live. They know how to adjust. They know how to live.
Eric,
it would have been possible.
What is it you're saying? That government could have shut down and said, we've shut down Jipangeni.
Yes.
That is ridiculous.
There you go. That is exactly why the government did not do that, because it knew the kind of opposition that was coming up. And
you're giving one side of the story.
That's the
Eric.
Kind of story.
Look
at
what Rwanda did. Look at what Uganda did. Look at what India did. You shut down, and you tell people stay home. For those homes that aren't able, we will provide the food.
Yes.
You do not shut down. Even, you know what? If you,
are they spending 70 billion? Are they spending 70 billion shillings equivalent in Uganda? No, they are not.
They're not.
Can I tell you
even
something?
Even in Rwanda, because we have spoken to people in Rwanda. David D is not in Rwanda. We have spoken to people in Rwanda, and they say even when now the government has shut down and it's distributing food to the vulnerable, it is a small number of the vulnerable. There's a specific criteria. It's not everybody now who goes out to go and work. No. And everybody else is able to being sorted out by the...
You're simplifying. But why I'm quoting David D is because he said, we are thinking about, and I'm agreeing with you.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, we are saying the informal sector. And what he said, informal sector know how to survive. The people who are most vulnerable is the middle class. You see these people who have been laid off.
Yeah.
Norfolk is laying off.
Yes.
Airlines laid off. Middle class live on paycheck to paycheck.
Paycheck to paycheck.
Within 1 month. And then you don't have a rural farm. Because what happened? By the way, when the lockdown was announced, what will end up country?
Yeah.
Where you can see your food as you
It's
can
the middle
eat it
class
as
that
you're
we are
growing
seeing
it.
being covered in the news, selling stuff on because they are thinking, okay, now I don't have. The middle class are the ones who are not able to pay rent. You see that study by KNBS? It's those guys, the people who lost an income immediately, and they don't know how else to survive. Those are the ones that are hard hit.
Yeah, but then
The
Eric,
people
you're
that-
simplifying the issue of food security.
I am not.
Do
Wajiro.
not
I am just
underplay.
saying it
So
would have been possible for the government to lock down, even if it's for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, you'd be able to adjust and sort out the people who are vulnerable, the people who completely are really in need. Even in this broke government, the broke government could have fed some people.
You know, in
This
a
broke
way, I
government
agree
is
with
sending
you.
has sent 8,000 shillings to the elderly and the
Yeah, so
the
what are,
disabled.
what are we arguing? Because we were saying...
because you're saying the government could not have locked down
No,
because
no,
it's
no,
broke.
no, no,
And I'm saying it could have locked down.
Excuse me. Let me then correct what you are oversimplifying and missing the point. The point I'm making is we had resolute decision making in South Africa, in Rwanda, in Uganda. In Kenya, government did a calculation. They are broke. Indeed, they are. But there is money. They are broke, but they are still spending money on other things. And this is what I was saying yesterday, as David D said, as Prof told us, as Wangari told us, we need wartime economic management. They should have said, stop all other expenditures. The only thing we are doing now is dealing with health, dealing with food security, and dealing with human security, because obviously the police have to do this,
We're in
and then
agreement.
essential services.
Okay.
Now, they never did that.
We're in agreement.
Yeah.
They
So
did
we're
not-
in agreement.
And the other thing
So
I'm
I
saying
think
is
it's a failure of leadership.
They did not need to have gone into that whole big story of let's stop building roads so that we can lock down the country tomorrow.
They go together.
They could have stopped the country tomorrow and still fed people. This
What-
today
what
they
are you
are sending
saying?
120,000 people are receiving
yeah.
1,000 shillings every week today as we speak. How many youth have been employed in this broke government? This broke government is giving money to the youth to sweep the streets. It has money. It would have been possible to feed people if on the
Who
15th.
says a government with a
If on
2.7
the
trillion budget
15th
doesn't have money?
I think, you know what,
That's
the
it.
point of this here
So
is...
you- what are
hold
you
on.
saying, Eric?
The point
On
here
the
is very
15th,
clear.
the government could
The
have
point
said,
is clear.
everybody
Look at
stay indoors.
What we are saying
And
is
people
that
would have
we
stayed
needed
indoors.
people to stay indoors, not just for fanfare, because that would have been the time within which the spread of this disease would have been curbed. That's the point. And during that time, it would have been very possible for these vulnerable people that we keep talking about to have been fed. I refuse to hear that there's no money, it was broke. No, it's not the point. It will not fly. It could have been shut down for 3 weeks. People who needed it could have been fed. And in that time, the disease would have been spread. That is what has happened in our neighbors. It would have been stopped.
I'm not sure we're saying different things.
That
It's
is what
just
has hold on. That is what has happened with our neighbors here. And that is why we see them today when we're recording higher numbers in terms of transmission. Today they're opening schools on the 8th of June in Uganda.
But maybe
They're opening up the economy in
maybe-
Rwanda.
Hi, pause. 10 minutes to 7 o'clock. Let me play this commercial break and then we come back into this conversation. Good morning.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah.
You're listening to
35
Spice
minutes.
FM.
Headline. One top
One
story.
each.
No,
I have
one.
one. I have one.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning.
Well, I think,
Spice up
we're going to
yourself.
hear from the committee in the next couple of days. But from the page of Day, it's what
Mornings done right.
by
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
committee is that a suggestion is being made to open schools in September, push exams to next year. Learners will remain at home until September. If recommendations by a committee tasked with exploring the possibility of reopening schools and advising the Education Cabinet Secretary are adopted. The COVID-19 Education Response Committee has also recommended that KCSE and the KCPE examinations be pushed to February next year, according to a source familiar with the contents of the report. And we know that report is being submitted today. It's likely that before the 6th or around about the 6th, we will hear what this is all going to be about. So it'll be interesting to see if that actually pulls through.
I must confess at this point, the concerns raised by KNUT and KUPET come to mind, because when decisions of this magnitude are being made, you want the committee charged with this to have a different perspective. Now, when you have owners and investors in education sitting to make decisions about whether schools open or not, they are going to be influenced by their primary interest, which is, as investors, you need your returns. If you have teachers, the other side of this, who are not the investors, they are the ones saying, well, we'll be frontline, we're the ones who are exposed, you then have, when you're sitting around the table, a balance in this debate. So I am concerned. We wait to see what these recommendations are. But for me, that's the immediate thing that jumps out. If KNUT was around the table, sitting with investors in education, then we'd be much more comfortable.
So the investors in education here, we are talking about the Private Schools Association and the faith-based schools, right?
Right.
Those are the ones.
Who else is on this committee?
The other people in this committee include, apart from the Muslim Education Council, the National Council of Churches of Kenya,
Investors.
and the Catholic bishops.
Investors.
We have the school heads, and these are teachers,
Okay.
right? They are not investors; they are
Right.
school heads. We have
They're
the
not
Kenya.
teachers, they're school heads.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
The Kenya Parents Association is involved,
That's
and these are the ones who are sending their children to school.
Agreed.
All right, and then we also have the Teacher Service Commission. This represents the teachers.
It's not a union, though.
Yeah,
it's
not
a government
union.
body.
It's
government.
it's the
when
employer.
when you see Kenya Service Commission, you're seeing government.
Of course, but it's
Yeah.
the employer.
Yeah, so it's not
And
the
the
teachers.
employer here is the one who's thinking, all right, so am I taking my staff to a danger zone, or am I not taking my staff to a danger zone?
No, the employer is government. So
It is okay, it's the government, but is the employer thinking about the government, or is it thinking about staff?
the
employer is
employer has
thinking-
marching orders. Right? So when you're
Okay.
talking about balance of power,
Okay, so we have the Kenya National Examinations Council. We have the others who are the Union of Post-Primary Education Teachers. This is a union. And we have Ministries of Health, Ministry of Health advisors who are also in this.
so KUPET is there.
There's a union that's there.
There's a union, okay.
Okay?
All right.
So the beef here is that there are other unions that play a role in education that were not involved.
Yeah, that usually that are more strident when dealing with government. But anyway, let's say there's been a process. Let's hear what comes out. I think the criteria for opening up are the ability to contain the spread. I think that will be interrogated once it's out in the public
also I
domain.
think
And
the-
this still
the
has to
question
go
will be asked
to
on-
Parliament anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If once the CS for Education takes this to the National Emergency Response Committee, and Dr. Amoth says, look, I'm expecting that we'll hit our peak in September. And therefore, what does that imply? Does it imply that here is a time when we are getting all this? So if we open up schools, we are basically going to be either restrained because more people will be in schools and isolation centers across the country, because schools are the isolation centers
They are.
across the counties.
They actually
So
are.
let's hear how this conversation goes. When you come out of this traffic break at the top of the hour, is that's when I'm going to give you the proverb. Or should I just give you the proverb? Okay, it's from Igbo.
Don't keep us in suspense.
The one
Let's
against
have the
whom you
proverb.
practice divination, the one against whom you practice divination surpasses you in being a diviner. Yep.
What's you talk?
Just think about that. Good morning. It's 7 o'clock.
Right, let's look at what the Friday morning looks like in terms of traffic for today. Waiaki Way is moving very slowly going towards town. At the 87, you have a bit of a hold up, and then that takes you down towards Westlands. That shouldn't be too much of a problem. It's moving slowly this morning, but it will not be too bad. Gong Road is looking very good, actually. No vehicular traffic at all, save for one lone vehicle, as we can see right now, and a few people taking a walk. So Gong Road is not going to be posing a problem for us this morning. Mombasa Road was a nightmare yesterday, and we're seeing the makings of the same right now. Right smack at the end of the month, we're likely to see heightened levels of traffic going into the weekend. Plus, we remember the habits, and we know that still there is a cessation of movement, but people will be trying to get out of the city of Nairobi. That is granted. We're going to take a look at Thika Road in a bit. It's likely that traffic will be in and outbound, but to give you details of that in a short while. You can reach us on Spice FM KE on Twitter. Let's see what you see, and then we can spread the word. But for now, everything looks to be just okay.
This is The Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political
Spice
observer,
FM broadcasting on
a fountain of wisdom in
94.4
these
in
politically
Nairobi,
uncertain
87.9
times.
Mombasa,
Ndu
102.5 Kisumu,
Nigerian by
96.4
birth,
Nakuru,
Kenyan by
96.7
choice,
Eldoret,
communications
90.9
expert,
Nyeri,
Pan-Africanist, a
97.7
truth seeker
Malindi.
and
Live stream is
believer
at
in people power,
www.spicefm.co.ke,
and
Spice FM
Eric
KE
Agent
on
Provocateur.
YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. In the room this morning and this week, Wanjiru Gekonyo, she's the Executive Director of the Institute for Social Accountability, Nduoko, and Eric Latif. Wanjiru, let's talk about something that was there in the Supreme Court recently. So the Council of Governors, after having a back and forth with the national government and the National Assembly, was it last year or the year before? Last year, yeah. Mm-hmm. On, are we getting money, are we not? Mm-hmm. The division of revenue, do we have enough money? Even the president going to a point and saying, look, people, just take what we have, all right? We are going to deal. So Council of Governors went to court to seek an advisory opinion. What was it about?
I was hoping Kamodo would do that, but it was about devolution, the devolution of power, and the responsibility of the national government to ensure it complies with the provision for sharing of revenue. Sharing of revenue is a very important principle that's at the heart of devolution, because normally we'll see, well, there's counties, we've got our governor, our MCA, but at the heart of it, power is about resources, and resources are generated through revenue. Mm-hmm. And the national government has the primary responsibility to generate revenue. There are different revenue sources, and the most lucrative ones or the most significant ones are given to the national government. Yep. So national government has the powers to raise revenue. Counties, on the other hand, have the wider mandate to implement and provide service delivery. It therefore, the Constitution in its wisdom and devolution and federalism as it's structured all across the world, therefore requires a sharing of this revenue that is raised nationally to ensure that services at the local level are provided, so that counties need to get enough money to give us health, to give us agriculture, food security, to give us water, to give us basic service provision. And in fact, one of the things, if I was to link this to the COVID outbreak, the soft underbelly of our governance structure is that national government has continued to operate as central government instead of giving counties the wings to fly, so to speak, enabling them by giving them the resources and the enabling legislation. So one of the sticking points has been the sharing of revenue. There is a process. Recommendations come from the CRA, they go to the Treasury. The Treasury then prepares the proposals that go to Parliament. This goes into a mediation process through a body called IBEC. And then the bill is tabled in Parliament and debated in Parliament. It goes to the Senate, it's debated. So it's a very long process that takes several months.
Yep.
And what has happened is that over time, this process hasn't been working. And particularly under the Jubilee administration, which is very centrist in its approach to governance, there's been a tendency for the national government to hold on to most of the resources so it can fund its projects, the national flagship projects. So this is the scenario that led to a huge standoff. If you recall, last year this time, counties didn't have money.
Yeah.
Counties in June didn't have money. In July didn't have money. Were not able to pay staff. Were not able to give services. Actually, they were relying on the local revenues. And yes, this forced the case to go to court. Now, I'll say that our institution, together with the Kenya Human Rights, was the first institution. We were the first to go to court. We went to the High Court. Because we can't file an appeal in the Supreme Court. And we went to the High Court to contest what was going on because we said, government, there needs to be an agreement, and that agreement has to help the counties, but it wasn't happening. So we went to court, High Court. We didn't get very far with our case because it's a very politically charged case. And we were very proud of the governors and who came in. And there are numerous... the governors have numerous cases in court. And all those cases have to do with the transfer of power. And this happens. You devolve power in the Constitution. It then has to happen in practice.
Yep.
So that's the long story to what happened. And we're very happy with
so
the
just to
outcome
break
of
it
the
down,
court case.
on the 15th of this month, the Supreme Court gave its advisory. And it was about these two issues. The Division of Revenue Bill and the Appropriations Bill, and what goes before the other. Because what we saw in Parliament is that they went to attempt to pass the Appropriations Bill before they had passed the Division of Revenue Bill, right?
They didn't even attempt. They did it. The minister read the budget, and in fact, that's the day we filed a case to stop the reading of the budget.
What
We said you can't. What is the national budget? What's the national government's budget if you haven't shared revenue? You've collected revenue because the Constitution has given you power to. You then proceed to say, well, because you've refused to take what we are giving you, we will continue to spend what we've decided.
Yep.
It means the division of revenue then is a nullity.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's no point.
There's no point. So when we went to the High Court, we wanted to stop the budget process, and we were saying, stop this process so that they first agree on the shareable revenue. And once that is done, then you can proceed. But the High Court wouldn't hear us, and they said it was overtaken by events. But fortunately, the governors marched. It was the first time we've seen the governors march. I think they should have been marching much more, and went to the Supreme Court. And so we were enjoined as amicus together with Katiba Institute.
Okay.
Yeah, and so...
Let's speak now to a constitutional expert. In fact, a man who was at the heart of the rollout of this constitution, the implementation of the constitution, lawyer Kamodho Iganjo.
And the advocate representing CRA in the Supreme Court case.
In the Supreme Court. Hey, lawyer Kamodho Iganjo.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. How are you?
We are fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well.
Nduoko is also in the studio. Say hello to her.
Odo, how are you?
Good morning, Kamodho. How are you?
Very well,
Good.
well.
Now, Kamodho, this very good opinion that came out of the Supreme Court. And Wanjiru has just given us the background of what was happening, how the Institute for Social Accountability went to the High Court, how the Council of Governors themselves went and sought the advisory from the Supreme Court. Just tell us, what did the Supreme Court say?
The Supreme Court made a decision at 3 levels on the basis of the issues that had been brought to it. I think it's important to keep emphasizing the background, because sometimes the technical aspect of it, the legal aspect of it, sometimes the effect of the misuse of the Constitution, because that's what's been happening. The effect of it is not always obvious to the public. What's been happening in the last, since we started the process of devolving, is that because the process has been abused primarily by the national government, National Assembly, and the Treasury, is that effectively monies that are allocated to county governments have been going down. If you look at the allocations from 2013 as a proportion of the revenue that you collect, which means we are talking about effective allocations. So that if you look at 2013, I think the county governments were allocated something like 23% of the revenue that we collected. By last year, that figure had gone to about 17%. So increasingly, the amount had been, even though the actual numbers look to be increasing, in relation to the amount of revenue and the size of our economy, the allocations to county governments have been going down. And the reason for this has been primarily because of these defects. Because the truth of the matter is there are some contradictions in the Constitution. And that is what the Supreme Court was asked to resolve.
Okay.
One of those is that issue that I think is the issue which you talked about just before I came in, which is about the fact that the way our Constitution designs the public finance process, it appeared to allow for the national government to do an appropriations act, an appropriations bill and an appropriations act before they had been allocated money. What is the effect of that? Because county governments don't have the same power, the county governments have to wait for the division of revenue bill to be passed into a law, and then what is called the County Allocation of Revenue Act is then passed. They cannot be able to appropriate any money before those two acts are passed. Which means that if the financial year ends and Parliament has not agreed on the division of revenue, county governments have no money. The national government, however, continues to spend. So what it means is that there is no incentive whatsoever for the National Assembly to agree with the Senate on the allocations to counties. What they do is they just wait out. Once the financial year ends, counties start to get desperate by July. By August, people are saying whatever is available on the table, just give us. Because by that time, people are demonstrating. There are no services starting. People are having to depend on your local revenue. So that has been one of the problems. Don't forget, however, there's another problem that people don't see. The national government, what is called the national government, CDF, is based on a proportion of the amount of money allocated to the national government. What does that mean? The members of parliament have a perverse incentive to ensure that as much money is allocated to the national government as opposed to the county governments, because the more money is allocated there, the more money is available for CDF, because it's a proportion, I think it's 2.5%. So if the amount of money increases every year, then the better for CDF. So those are some of the problems that have been there. And now what the Supreme Court said on that question, they said, look, by the end of, before either the national government or the county governments can appropriate any money, the respective allocations for each level must be known. Because you must know what you are appropriating. When you are budgeting as a national government, what are you budgeting? Who told you that is the amount of money that you are entitled to? So everybody must wait for the division of revenue. The advantage of that, Eric, is that it means that the National Assembly now and the national government have an incentive to settle the question of the division of revenue before the end of the financial year. Because everyone now suffers. if the amount, if the allocations,
if there's no
are not
agreement,
agreed.
nobody will move.
If there's no agreement, everyone suffers.
Yeah.
Now, there's another limb to the decision of the Supreme Court. Actually, there are two others. The other one, they said, wait a minute, in any event, if there is no agreement by the end of the financial year, county governments are entitled also, because they also provide services to Kenyans.
Mm-hmm.
County governments are entitled to 50% of the money that they were allocated last year. They're also entitled, just like the national government is allowed to collect 50% pending an agreement on the budget, county governments are also entitled to 50% of the money. What that means is that the way county governments have now been punished before by being made desperate so that they can take whatever pickings are available, that option is not available. That is a very important development in terms of equalizing the negotiating powers between the Senate and the National Assembly on the monies allocated and available to county governments. So that for me, so those were the two major decisions that were made. But there's a third one, which was that until now, the question was, what happens if the National Assembly and the national government and the Senate do not agree on the division of revenue within the timeline? Suppose the financial year ends, they have not agreed, 50% is released, they don't agree, what happens? And the Supreme Court said, listen, in the Constitution of Kenya 2010, the Constitution had said that law that is supposed to be passed, the implementation laws that are supposed to be passed within the 5 years must be passed, and if they are not passed, any citizen can petition the Chief Justice for the dissolution of Parliament. And they said this is an implementation law. The division of revenue is an implementation law. If this law is not passed within the timelines that the Constitution, any citizen can petition Parliament, can petition the Chief Justice for dissolution of Parliament, and the Chief Justice, following the provisions of Article 261, can order the dissolution of Parliament. That again is an important sword of Damocles of a Parliament. There are procedural problems, but I fear that. Don't forget, and because I sat in the CIC, one of the fears that parliamentarians had was the possibility of dissolution, however remote the possibility. And so just having it there is very, very important.
It's an incentive.
We are not all helpless. It's a very good incentive. So what we are saying is that the Supreme Court in the last so many years has made some very progressive decisions in terms of ensuring that the spirit of devolution is affirmed. Now, the next part, of course, is compliance with those decisions.
Of course.
But I think the place to start is to say the decisions are there.
It's actually good to hear that. Kamodo, we have very many questions out of this. And just please stay on the line. Let's do weather and then come back and start now the questions. Shooting questions left, right, and center. Good morning. We are speaking with Kamodo Iganjo. He is a constitutional expert. He is a lawyer who participated and represented the Commission for Revenue Allocation in the just concluded petition in the Supreme Court, and that's what he's telling us about. But also, Kamodo Iganjo was a member of the Commission for the Implementation of the Constitution. So when you talk about the Constitution of Kenya 2010, this man can actually recite it for you from the first page to the last schedule.
And he was responsible for the Committee on Public Finance.
There you go.
Yes, I was.
Hey. Keep it right here. 19 minutes after 7. This is a situation room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation.
Nairobi, 16 degrees is what we are at currently, highs of 25 and lows of 12. Taking a look then into Nyeri, where the showers have already started coming down at 16 degrees. It'll be a wet day and into the weekend with highs of 23 and lows of 13. Nakuru at 15 degrees is mostly sunny this morning. That'll change to showers later with highs of 24 and lows of 13. It's partly cloudy conditions in Eldoret at 14 degrees. We'll see highs of 22 and lows of 12 with showers leading all through till Monday. Kisumu at 20 degrees is is mostly cloudy. Rains expected later with highs of 28 and lows of 19. Kakamega is following suit with cloudy conditions at 17 degrees this morning, but that will change in the afternoon and it will be a thundery weekend in the western town. Malindi at 27 degrees is partly cloudy this morning, highs of 29 and lows of 25. In Mombasa at 26 degrees is mostly sunny conditions. They'll prevail for most of the day with highs of 30 and lows of 24. Taking a look then into Kampala, where at 21 degrees it's mostly cloudy. Rains are going to make their debut in the afternoon with highs of 26 and lows of 19. Dar es Salaam will be partly cloudy through all the day, entering into the weekend with highs of 31 and lows of 22. Johannesburg at 6 degrees is going to be clear skies but chilly conditions, highs of 18 and lows of 4. And we'll wrap things up in Lagos for now, where it's 24 degrees and clear skies with a few clouds, highs of 32 and lows of 24.
Twenty-two after 7. This is a situation in the room. We have for Eric Lati. On the line is lawyer Kamoro Iganjo, constitutional expert. So we've got questions. Who goes first? There's consensus. So I'm asking the first question out of consensus, Kamoro.
That's okay.
The role of the Commission on Revenue Allocation in this whole process. We understand that the CRA gives some advice to the Treasury or to the national government. Is this supposed just to be advice? Should it be heeded? Is it binding?
Good. Now, again, going back to some of the dysfunctions in our constitution, and the CRA in the initial design of the constitution, if you look to previous designs until the draft went to Naivasha and came back with some challenges. The institution was supposed to be a fairly strong institution, and that is why it is given security of tenure. That is why it comprises the various political, it comprises of members who are appointed by the major political party and the minority political party. The Treasury sits as a substantive member. The reason for that, it was supposed to be the professional body in which these political questions are negotiated, but with the technical input.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, when the draft left Naivasha and came back, the powers of the commission were so reduced. So you are left with a very strong institution, but whose views are not different from those of the Association of Bloggers. They can be dismissed at any time. They go to parliament. They don't mean anything, and one has to see that there's a contradiction. There's a problem. Why would you need to create an institution like this, spend money on it, give security of tenure to its members, and its opinions don't count for anything? So one of the questions, unfortunately, the Constitution itself allows for Parliament to depart from the views of the Commission. The Constitution specifically allows that. Now, one of the questions that was there before the Supreme Court was, in what circumstances can that departure be constitutional? Now, the court discussed that matter in length and eventually said that the views of the Commission, while not binding, must be taken into account. There must be evidence that the views have been taken into account and that they've been considered in the process of determining the ultimate allocations and on other financial questions. That again is an important finding, because what it does, it means that if you're going to move away from the recommendations of the Commission, then you need to show that there's a constitutional, it's not just that you have a different view, but there's a constitutional basis for moving from those grounds. And I think that was important in affirming the role of the Commission. One, in recognizing, yes, their views may not be binding because ultimately division of revenue is a political process, but their views are not just, to be dismissed. So that was an important aspect. Yes.
Kamodo, it's very difficult to ask questions here because my only regret is that we haven't been able to have a celebratory drink due to COVID. This is indeed a really good ruling. And I think we need to prepare for dissolution in the coming year, because I believe this year there is agreement on the division of revenue. And the circumstances don't call for that. But the one thing, when we were running the campaign last year, we were struck that the general public had very little sympathy for the counties. And they kind of were saying, why are we giving them more money? They're just going to eat it. Not really getting the gist of this big confrontation. What's your take on that? What have counties done or not done to support their case in the division of revenue, much as the court has given them a thumbs up?
I think there are challenges. One is that in terms of expectations and delivery, don't forget that counties and devolved government came in, and people had very, very high expectations on them. And of course they were going to be disappointed. Primarily because in terms of capacity, I think sometimes we forget that the amount of money that is actually released to the counties, probably 70% of it is purely for recurrent expenditure. It's for buying drugs, it's for paying salaries, it's for the amount of money that is left for development is very, very little. So in terms of what people expect counties to accomplish in terms of development and what they're able to accomplish, even if they were running effectively, even if they had people of integrity, it will still be a disappointment. So that's number one. But number two is that also there has been disappointed in terms of quality of delivery of services. The truth of the matter is, even with the little money that is there, counties could have done a lot better to excite the public in terms of the need to therefore allocate them more, because even with the little, they are doing some. Now, of course, there are examples here and there where some countries have done pretty well. And I think the problem is that the negative story shines, a lot stronger, and it's a lot louder.
Of course.
Than the work, and that's only normal, that's only natural. But the truth of the matter is that if you are to go around this country, and I've been to 40, I think the only country I've not been to is Mandera. I've been to all the others. There is no question that outside Nairobi, because I think Nairobi has been a disaster in every respect, and part of it also has to go with the amount of money available for the services for Nairobi, but also a dysfunctional county. But that's a different story. If you go outside of Nairobi, you will find, if you go to West Pokot, if you go to the Bogomas, you will still find the presence of the county government is a lot stronger than the presence of the national government before devolution. Number three is the question of corruption. The truth of the matter is that the corruption in the county may be small, but it's more obvious. It's louder, So I think sometimes we forget that the reason why Kenyans are aware about corruption in county government, it's not because it's more, but it's because it is louder. It's more evident. It's more evident. It's in your face. You're aware. The national government can disappear with 300 billion shillings, and you would never know. But if you go to my county and you do a parking for 30 million shillings instead of the one that was done by the neighboring county at 20 million, people will know.
Somebody's going to know.
And so people, people will know. So that means that it is louder, it is more obvious, and that's a good thing. Because then it means that people then hold local governments accountable better. The problem is that the narrative that has then been created is that corruption is actually bigger in the counties. That is a lie. In fact, if you do shilling for shilling, if you take the audit report, leave alone media reports, if you take the audit report and do shilling for shilling and say, what is the amount of money that has been reported as misspent in the county government, and then compare that with the national government, one national government ministry is capable, has in terms of volume, will have more questions aggregated. Versus the counties aggregated.
Right.
But you will not hear, because if you hear the Ministry of Health has lost 50 billion shillings, it doesn't look like it's a big thing, or 20 billion. But a county that loses 1 million, 2 million, because if you look at the numbers in the audit reports for county government, they're usually small figures. It doesn't make them right. It doesn't say that that's right. But just means in terms of narrative, the story has been that the counties in any case are very, very corrupt. The solution, Wanjiru, is not to say therefore take the money back to the national government, because that is where a lot of the rot is. It is to say, what is it that we need to do to ensure that the counties are accountable? It is not to take the money back to the big hole that it's been for the last 50 years. It is to say, let us create better systems of accountability in the counties. Let us empower people, because the people in the counties are a lot more able to hold government to accountable than the ones in Nairobi. The governor lives in the county, or at least visits the county regularly. The MCAs live in the neighborhood. The CECs, the ministers are there. The county headquarters are there. The governors and their officers drive to work every morning through the county. So it is much easier to interact with them and hold them accountable. Instead of a minister who lives in the Harambe House or Ministry of Water, you will never interact with those people. Even if you have questions, where do you take them? Wanjiru can write an op-ed, but the rest of Kenyans, what do they do? So I think we need to see the context in which we this narrative about corruption. My problem with it is not that people say there's corruption, but what they then provide as a solution.
Kamova, you mentioned something, I mean, as you went through this, and just talking about the split, whereby we're looking at a majority of a budget that goes towards recurrent expenditure vis-a-vis development. And for a country that's clamoring to reach economic development, or at least hold on to its tail, it seems to me that things should then be reversed. And I know that you've talked about this previously, even in this room, we've had this conversation with you. And I know you have made suggestions, but it doesn't seem to make sense to quite a number of people that 70 to 80% of a budget goes towards recurrent expenditure. How can it practically change? Because here are people on the ground who are baying for, roads, baying for a properly buffered health system, an education system, transport networks, etc., etc. Whereas most of the money that is budgeted for is going to anything but that. How can that actually be made different?
The truth of the matter is that we do need to rationalize the public service. And that is not just the public service in the national government, but also in the counties. About 6 or so, I think about five or so years ago, there was an effort done to rationalize. I think it was read by the SRC, to rationalize particularly the staff situation in the county government. Because don't forget, what happened is that when the counties came into office, one, they inherited the local government workers. And don't forget that the local government workforce was very bloated. So that was number one. Number two, when county governments came up, part of the reason why people devolved was they needed their people employed. That's the reality. If you went to Narok, they wanted the people of Narok employed by government. And that is why they wanted the county government. And the county government is a political institution. So obviously, they also employed people. And not forgetting that there were already people who are sitting. So then the national government itself, it had its own workers who are working in the devolved ministry, the Ministry of Water. The Ministry of Water had staff in Narok County who are working in the Ministry of Water there. So the county government ended up inheriting the national government, the national level staff, the local authority staff, and then the people they themselves employed. So you have very huge bloated workforce in the county government, and that is a reality, and that is something that needs to be worked on collectively by the national government and the county government, because it's also very difficult to send people home. Employment is a very heated political question. To send people home means that you need to look for some money to send them away. Where is that money going to come from when you don't have even enough to survive? So there's a big problem there. But the other side is that recurrent expenditure is not just salary. Recurrent expenditure is also drugs. It is those inputs for agriculture. Those things that we pay regularly. And that take a significant portion of the monies that go to the county government. But I totally agree with you that it doesn't make sense that in a country that really needs to be developing, that we are spending more and more money in paying salaries. Sometimes not necessarily for people who are delivering. If you're paying salaries and people are delivering, then it will be okay. But if you're paying for people, some are ghost workers, some are people where there's overemployment, there's underemployment, and a lot of under delivery. If we are not, if that's what we are doing, then of course there is a problem.
So
And
how
that is
shall we
something
ever get out of this,
yes.
Kamodo? So one, you've given us, yes, the best thing, the ideal thing would be to trim the workforce. But then
Yes.
come to the reality of the politics behind it. How can we then get out of this quagmire?
And Kamodo,
Yes,
just can I
yes.
add on to that question around the
Yes.
labor force? Because at some point, there was a discussion about this 70-30 split, about 30% going to recurrent expenditure, saying that teachers, healthcare workers, and let's say extension workers and such are very vital for service delivery.
That's true.
And this 70-30 might make sense at the national level, where the national government has primarily a policy making and regulatory, not even regulatory, this kind of oversight role. But when you're talking about deepening service delivery up to the village level, if possible,
The worker bees
is
in the
is
county.
this 70-30 really realistic? And this links to the fact that functions weren't really costed, and the cost of delivering effective services and the number of staff that are required to deliver weren't really costed. And we seem to be then caught up with a measure that was put in the law, but doesn't really speak to the reality. And maybe what we are fed up with is inefficiency and people being hired because they are not competent. I don't think there's anyone who's arguing that we could do with more healthcare workers, more clinical workers. We want our nurses well paid. So are we talking about the right thing when we talk about salaries, really, at this 30-70?
In fact, that's what I'm saying, that the issue is actually not whether it is 70. The issue is that what are we spending that money on? Because even if we spend 100%, but it is for people that are delivering services to Kenyans, that would be okay. The problem now is that if you go, and there's a report done, I can't remember what that process was, the CAPS process, the rationalization of the public service. I think that's what it was called, the CRPS, which was then stopped in court, unfortunately. The reason for that was to ask the question, who are the staff we need to provide an effective public service?
Yes.
What do we need to pay them? Who do we need to retire? Who do we need to send home? Who do we need to retrain? Where are we having duplicated services? That was really to answer that question, because until we resolve that question, the reality is that there are significant amounts of money that we are using for the wrong reason. And that is something that needs to be rationalized early enough. And then we can be able to say, look, even though we are paying a lot of money for salaries, we actually should be paying a lot more in this aspect of this public service. Maybe we are paying a lot more for bureaucrats who just sit in offices. We should be putting more money. We should be reducing the money on that side and paying more money to the delivery of services for agricultural extension workers.
Yeah.
So that conversation about rationalizing the public service for effective service delivery, because that really is the question. That is the question that has not been resolved. And that has implications, because then it means, and that's what I'm saying, that it means that once you do that, you're going to find you have a significant number of people that you do need to let go.
Yep.
But those people are legitimate and legally hired. And you do need them to provide the resources to do that. And once that point was reached, then it became a hot potato. So the reality is we need to rationalize, and that rationalization would then mean that we can then be putting more money in development. And development, by the way, includes the provision of services, particularly in those essential services.
Let's take another short break, Kamodo, at 21 minutes to 8 o'clock. Take a look at traffic. And then this conversation continues. On the line with us is the constitutional lawyer, Kamodo Waiganjo. Good morning. This is A Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. Remember, our live stream is up, www.spicefm.co.ke. Also, you can watch us on Spice FM KE, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Good morning.
take a look and see how things may have changed. We start off in Nairobi, where on Mombasa Road, it's actually built up right around the SGR, moving all the way down to General Motors. This is what we expect this morning. Hopefully, it will not be so bad as what we saw yesterday, and hopefully there will be no accidents either. All right, looking on Thika Road as well, trying to get into the CBD through the Pangani Underpass, others joining towards Limuru Road, and others joining then towards the Globe Cinema Roundabout. You'll be fine. It's slow, but it's moving, however. All right, let's take a look outside of Nairobi into Kisumu, where there seems to be a bit of a problem. The Tulu Bridge has been swept away, understanding that the rain is still coming down quite heavy in these parts. So the Tulu Bridge then between Oswome and Nyabola is impassable, and this is a major road that links the city to other parts of Western, so you might want to be very careful. Actually, don't use it at all because you won't be able to get through. So that's a piece of information for you there. And in Mombasa, it looks pretty good within the city, within the town, not having much problems this morning. All right, we'll take a look at Thika Road and other roads affected in a short while. Spice of MKE on Twitter, that's how you can reach us. Let us know what you see.
Yep, we're talking about entrenching and safeguarding this hour. On the line, there is lawyer Roy Ganjo. The Council of Governors had gone to the Supreme Court seeking an advice.
Spice up your life.
Allocation of money.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
The national government and the county government. Remember the impasse that was there last year, the passage of budget. The national government, the national government had gone ahead and passed the appropriations bill, and then they had not passed the division of revenue bill. So counties were basically not having money, and there was a whole back and forth that led to us seeing governors actually going on the streets and demonstrating and doing a walk from going all the way to the courts. This was something big. So they went to court, the COG. The others who were party to this were the Commission on Revenue Allocation, which was being represented by lawyer Kamodho Iganjo. He's just told us that the Supreme Court came out and said, you know what, there are a couple of things that you need guys to sort out. Follow the Constitution. And this is what the Constitution says. And also in some cases, clearing the air. So with that background, that's why we're now having this conversation with Kamodho. And just before we went to the break, we were discussing the issue of a bloated workforce in both levels of government, especially focusing on the counties.
Kamodho, you spoke earlier about, looking at then citizens being the ones who could be actors when if, decisions are not made at a certain level, to then look at something like the dissolution of parliament, right? And then to know that a certain level of comprehension is necessary of these factors that are playing out here. Because nobody's just going to rock up and go to court, right? Or appear at the Supreme Court. There must be a comprehension of this. And I often find that for you to see what a situation should be, then allows you to understand what you're really dealing with when that situation is not. So if we want to look at counties, for example, if counties were to be able to have the allocation that they should, what kind of pictures would we be looking at? What should the situation be in the country so that people can understand this is what actually it should be? So when you're served with what it is not, then you know what to go and clamor for. So how would you paint a picture from county to county in the country? What should actually be happening when they receive the allocation that is due to them?
Okay. The reality is that there is a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of citizen awareness, because the reality is that citizens always don't make a distinction between who does what in the county government. So they're not always aware. Sometimes the main highway has a problem, you'll find citizens demonstrating against the county government. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of awareness, so that people understand the respective responsibilities of each level of government. But there are certain functions that exclusively, or largely, almost exclusively belong to counties. Functions like water, the provision of water services, the provision of health, the agricultural services. In those areas, counties that have livestock issues, again, those are issues of market, issues of parking spaces, those are issues that belong exclusively to county governments. And Wananchi should be able to see a difference in terms of the services as they were before devolution to where they are now. No. Kenyans need to be able, county governments, responsible county governments need to be able to explain how they are spending money in each of these services. And they need to be able to show the respective benefits that Mwananchi is getting from county government getting allocated these resources. People need to see that they have a more effective access to agricultural extension services, the demonstration farms. People need to see that increasingly, even if it's not immediately, more and more people are getting access to water. If it's in the livestock areas, you need to see more water pans. You need to see more boreholes so that Kenyans increasingly are getting better and better services over time. If you're talking about health, people need to see that you have health centers, not health centers in every other ward, and effective health centers that have medicine, that have nurses, that have doctors. That is what people need to see. And there are places, there are places you will go, and if you compare, and I think the problem with the human being has a very short memory. The biblical story of people who said we want to go back to Egypt, where we were eating onions and garlic, is very real. Yeah. If people are to remember the situation in 2010, in terms of health services, and the situation now, if you go around the country, it's a completely different story. It's a completely different story. You go to the people of Kapenguria and tell them you want to go before 2010, they would skin you alive because they have seen. They have seen. And when they don't have services, they know where to go. They may not always get the answers, but unfortunately, people, when they sit down at the mercy of hoping some minister comes from there, no, they don't have to. They don't have to eat for that time. They have Governor Lonyangapu. So in a sense, what we are saying is that the county governments have a huge responsibility also to ensure that the services that Kenyans that were devolved by the Constitution are seen, in terms of service delivery to the public. The problem with it, and I think that's the unfortunate situation about the division of revenue process, is that I talked about the fact that effective allocations have gone down. Last year, between 2018 and 2019, the allocation to county government increased below inflation. The increase was below inflation. Now, I don't know that people understand what that means. What it means is that for the same amount of money that you've been allocated this year, you cannot offer the same service because inflation is at a higher rate than the amount that it's like your salary. If you have an increase in your salary at 2%, but the inflation is at 7%, basically your salary has been reduced effectively. That is what actually happened to the counties last year, and that is the threat that was going to be there but for this ruling. What it essentially means that even the counties that are forward-looking and are doing some work, effectively they can't. And that is what citizens need to understand. That way, they can then demand, because citizens need to be able to continue demanding for more money to the county government. But also, once they have done that, we then need to create mechanisms to ensure that we don't have pilferage at the county government, and to ensure that the problems that we have at the national government in terms of huge losses of money are not replicated in the county government. And when they do, that people are held accountable. So that really is those are the linkages we need to have in terms of citizen empowerment, not just in terms of going to demand for more funds to come to the county governments from the national government, from the national parks, but also to ensure that once the money has come, the services are being delivered. And if they are not delivered, what mechanisms exist to hold the government accountable to deliver that service?
Yeah, Kamotho, it's great to have you on and to hear you speak. And of course, it's been quite a journey. It's very difficult implementing devolved government, devolved services when you have a national government that's really competing at every stage. And they say devolution is always contested, but I don't know whether this is the case in other countries. What, in your view, is the contribution of this ruling with regard to the resources that will go to counties, because we've seen the COVID epidemic, the scourge on the country, and we've seen that the most affected sectors are those in the care of the counties: health service provision, agriculture vis-a-vis food production. And in fact, even if you look at the informal sector, a lot of the informal sector is regulated under the counties. So counties are still pretty poorly resourced. How do you think this particular ruling is going to help to turn that tide so that Kenyans can really get the benefits of proper devolution?
I think the most critical component of these rulings is that it equalizes the bargaining powers, the negotiating powers at both levels. The Senate exists to negotiate for the counties. Until this ruling, it was entirely powerless, because it could be ignored. The CRA exists to ensure you have a technical input in this process. Until this ruling, it was completely ignored. What this ruling does, it is not so much whether it will give more or less. It is that it will ensure that the two parties are negotiating from a point of some level, not absolute, some level of equality. And that therefore means that the rational expectation is that more money should then be allocated where it is needed. Where it is needed. Whatever is available should be allocated, more of it should be allocated where it is needed. And that conversation has not always happened. The national government has started from the process that this is the amount that it needs. And then if there is whatever is available can be given to counties. Now what we are saying is that we look at the entire path there, and then we both agree, what do you need, what do I need, in relation to the services that I'm delivering. One then hopes that leads to more money going to the county government. This COVID season presents both an opportunity but also is a challenge for county government, because what you have seen is that there's been a huge move towards quite a bit of decentralization. Even in the health sector, especially the health sector, where this pandemic has affected the most, the health services are completely devolved, 100%, other than the referral hospitals. But you don't sense that the role of the counties in this process, ensuring that they are being given effective participation in the process, it is not obvious. What you have seen is huge allocations from various development partners to the national government. And the national government then makes decisions. And that makes sense in the context that we're in the context of an emergency. But I think we would have had a more effective process if we sat down and said, listen, the responsibility of health service provision is county governments. How do we ensure that they are part of this decision-making effectively so that we use this as a training process of knowing how to really develop? It is not an opportunity to re-centralize more, so that you re-centralize procurement, and then when you buy things, you deliver them to the counties. But why is it that we cannot say that, look, we have 8 billion shillings for buying emergency equipment? You sit down with the county government. This is what each county government needs. This is what we need to do. Let the county government spend, because ultimately, these are the people who will be held accountable. If there is a COVID outbreak in Murang'a County, where I come from, we will hold the governor accountable. We will not hold the CS accountable, because he's the one we know who deliver services. But the truth of the matter is, other than the little money that the county government has raised from initial budget, the county governments are not involved in this process effectively. So what we are saying is that there's a risk of greater decentralization through this process. And yet what this gave us is an opportunity to actually empower county governments to deliver the services for which they exist, and therefore to be held accountable by the people.
What are the opportunities for that dialogue, consultation, cooperation, intergovernmental coordination under the present political context?
It's a difficult one. The reality is that the Supreme Court decision presents an opportunity for that. Do we have the wherewithal to do it?
Yep.
That's a question that will have to be answered. That really is the issue. But there are several institutions that are going to be very, very critical now, which until now have almost been treated as a by the way. One is, of course, the CRA. We forget, and I raised this in the beginning, the Commission of Revenue Allocation, that commission consists of representatives of the major political players. And then it consists of the national government's principal officer on finance. Is a substantive member, the PS Treasury. Which means in that house you can both, and then all these people are required to be people with technical competence. Which means in that place, that is an objective institution in which a lot of these, before the political questions are answered, they should be able to say, look, looking objectively at where the need is. We believe that the county government should get, because we don't want to be concerned with the politics. You guys can go negotiate the politics once you pass there. But what we think is the amount of money required to deliver effective health services, to deliver effective agricultural services, is X amount of money. This is the amount of money available. This is what we propose. By the time that decisions leave the CRA, it should be more or less agreed, because that's a technical and political organ. Now, there is another institution called the IBEC in which the governor sits. One hopes that institutions like the IBEC also becomes a little more powerful, because this is now a forum for equal negotiations with equal bargaining powers. So that by the time these issues go to the House, the Senate, and the National Assembly, largely the issues have been resolved by parties in a negotiated environment, and we are not now going to see the sort of muscle flexing that has been there between the National Assembly, which sees itself as a protector of the national government, and the Senate that sees itself as a protector of the counties, and the two of them should now be able to negotiate with figures that have been agreed at a boardroom by all the players, and that should ultimately give a more objective proposal.
Very interesting insights that you've given us this morning. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Kamodho Waiganjo.
Asante sana.
And keep doing this, keep pushing for better understanding of our constitution and devolution.
Eric, let me say this before I leave.
Yes.
One of the problems about this conversation is that it is a very silent conversation.
Right.
You know, in fact, your problem was the first media house to give it attention. You know, most would rather, talk about Kieleweke and who's doing, a lot of which don't actually, in terms of effective management of the country, in terms of effective leadership for the country. Don't matter much, because it's the same individuals going round and round. These sorts of conversations are so critical, but you don't hear them. And so the public don't actually understand the nuances, the critical nuances that are happening, and why they are not getting services. But they believe the tidbits that come from social media and other places about all this corruption, there's so much money. And sometimes we need to create opportunities for effective conversations on these very critical national questions. And I really applaud Spice for doing this. I hope other media houses actually have not just this one, but other critical national conversations away from the politics, which is more exciting, but the things that really change the country are this one.
Asante sana. Thank you very much.
And
Thank
congratulations on a good argument in court. Well done.
Asante. Thank you,
Thanks,
Wanjiru.
Have a good one.
Okay.
Well, the conversation continues, the interesting conversations. This continues as well on our social media handles, Spice FM KE on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. All of our handles are Spice FM KE, wherever you look for us. So, well, we've discussed the devolution. We're seeing the kind of incremental gains that are happening through the Supreme Court. And like Kamodho started by telling us, this is not the first one. There have been others, right? And they're incremental. The point, I think, will be at a point where politicians agree to work to serve the people. Because once they agree to serve the people, then they have all the tools. Like Kamodho was saying, if you actually started IBEC and objectively decided this is what how we're going to negotiate, push and pull, get things done. If we start at CRA and said, this is technically or objectively, this is what should happen, then those decisions, because the political parties are represented, when they go to parliament, they should be able to just be canvassing and getting them passed. Hey, but this now, the other reality side of it is that this is Kenya. It's a maturing democracy. We have a lot of politics to play. We've got a lot of things to learn with time.
Actually,
so there's a point where we become optimistic.
With time, and it also goes to show that we thought, 1992 repeal of multi-party constitution is passed, it's done. But this is obvious that we have to keep fighting every single day, every action, contributes towards that the struggle for democracy.
The big goal. Today's proverb, as we come to the top of the hour, the one against whom you practice divination surpasses you in being a diviner.
The student becomes the teacher.
Yep. One who deceives one more knowledgeable than he does not know that he's wasting his time. Okay? Okay.
Where did you take that?
Huh.
You flipped it.
Completely,
I
right?
missed. I thought it was a positive proverb.
That is the proverb. Purpose of the proverb. Good morning. It's 8 o'clock.
May not be too difficult on the roads this morning. We don't have many issues coming out. Mombasa Road, we see that the normal hotspot, but that will open up, I'm sure, in not too long from now. Thika Road getting into the CBD, also not so bad. We don't have much problems this morning. It's a fantastic Friday morning. We do have some action on Thika Road outbound, of course, right around Blue Post. We know where people are going. But apart from that, it's not too much of an issue. Spice FM KE, in case you do see something that we should know about, any accidents or incidents, we'll take that information so we can spread the word.
This is The Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times.
And how are you
New
doing, wherever you
Oko,
are? Are you in Nairobi,
Nigerian by birth,
94.4,
Kenyan
or
by
Mombasa,
choice, communications
87.9,
expert,
Kisumu,
Pan-Africanist,
102.5,
a truth seeker
96.0
and
in
believer
Nakuru,
in people power,
96.7 in Eldoret,
and
90.9 in
Eric
Nyeri, or
Latin,
97.7 in
agent
Malindi,
provocateur,
or
the
are you
man
in
the chair,
Jakarta,
seasoned
Indonesia,
journalist,
in
news hound, a man
New
who
Zealand,
believes in punching up, not
Papua New
down.
Guinea?
This is the
Where you wanna go
Situation
now
Room,
next?
the
Anywhere else?
only
Brazil.
way to start your day.
Iceland.
Like what?
Yeah.
Okay.
You wanted, I gave you.
Is that how you pronounce that?
He's been divined.
This is it.
He's been divined. Relax.
Wajiro, what's the capital city of Iceland?
No idea.
That one she's probably
No idea.
You don't know
Reykjavik.
that one?
I could Google
Wherever
it.
you are, www.spicefm.co.ke or spicefmke on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Join the conversation as well on 0719-012-600. So, we've just been saying that the financial year is coming to an end. So today being the 29th day of May, we only have until the end of June, and then that is done, and then we begin a new financial year. This conversation is already happening in Parliament. The new budget, the issues have already been taken to Parliament. The budget policy statement was taken to Parliament. The committee, a parliamentary committee on budget and appropriation, looked at it and said, look, yeah. That time, by the way, the budget policy statement was talking about entrenching the Big Four agenda, and this is what the Treasury is trying to focus on, or the national government is trying to focus on. And the committee on budget and appropriation said, look, guys, you have come and told us these same stories. I know you're coming to tell us the same stories, and you're going to roll out the same budget for the same stories. Anyway, COVID came. Now, the budget has to be aligned, like Wanjiro was telling us. Wanjiro was telling us that we have to think about COVID. And it's true, the budget has got to have the reality of dealing with Kenya post-COVID, especially the next one financial year. It's got to be very, very important. So let's talk about the budget, right?
Yes. back to the contentious issue that we discussed very unconstructively between 6 and 7, that the country is broke. There are those in the room who don't think it's of big significance. But, it's actually...
The country is
the
broke, but it can feed its people.
I think we need to set a false premise there.
Let us allow me.
The country is broke. I think we need to clear that one.
Allow me to complete
broke.
what I'm saying, because that argument actually epitomizes how we perceive the national...
Which argument?
The national budget as Kenyans. As Kenyans, we still have not linked our livelihoods to government taxation, and we are keener on expenditure but not taxation. For some reason, and it's emerging democracy, the way governance works, you relate with what you see. You don't, So the discussion we are having in this hour, and we are fortunate we'll have a guest who's very knowledgeable in this area, is we are looking on this side that Kenyans tend not to discuss.
Right.
When we say that government is broke, when we say that government is heavily in debt, what is it we are talking about, and how does this affect us? Now, the reality is that, as you heard with Kamodo, and you've heard it, we've had it during the week, government is spending more than it is able to raise, forcing it to borrow. So why is government not able to raise? Wangari spoke to us about external debt, but there's also internal debt that we don't look enough at. So I think what the purpose here for us all is to understand better what is happening. What are these negotiations that government has quietly, and they land as a fait accompli and impact our lives even though we don't see them, because they're happening behind closed doors. And that is debt negotiations. Debt negotiations in this country affect all of us and our children and their children's children, as Eric likes to quote. But we are not privy to this conversation. So yes, what is the state of our debt? What is the state of our domestic debt? Why do we have a finance bill that, what are the proposals it's making? And how will those proposals affect us? Are they progressive? Are they regressive? Are they incoherent? That is what we need to decipher, so that as we are giving our submissions to the ministry on Tuesday, we are in the know.
So Finance Bill 2020. All right. Let's talk to Mr. Elias Wakisi. He's the manager for public policy and research at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya. That's ISPAC. Elias, good morning.
Good morning, Eric and Wanjiru. Good morning, everybody there.
Morning, Elias.
Everybody is called Ndu.
I guess so.
Oh,
Yeah, she represents the western part of the continent,
the world.
Yes,
Thank you.
She's our regional representative. She's a big deal.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
welcome to the Situation Room, Elias.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, you've heard, we're discussing Finance Bill 2020. And like Wajiro has introduced, let's focus on how we are raising our revenues, okay?
Yes.
With a focus on debt, whatever kind of debt, whether we are borrowing locally, domestically, whether you're borrowing internationally, whether you're borrowing commercially, whether you're looking for concessional loans, whatever it is. And I think the focus here would be also in the public understanding and having a participatory role in this particular one. Particularly how we raise our revenues. So starting from taxation, because we've got to start from there. We raise tax directly. I mean, we give the government money, and then it has some deficit that it needs to plug, and then it goes to the market to plug that deficit, or wherever it goes to plug that deficit. Looking at our tax base, just before we go into the debt, right? Looking at our tax base, we've had this conversation very many years that, KRA needs to widen its tax net so that we can have more and more people contributing to this cake, so that more and more people can then now enjoy the benefits of this. Is it a reality that we can ever get to?
Yes, it is a reality, and I'll start. I've been following that conversation when Wanjiru started on the focus on taxation. And what I can say is I think as a country, we've been focusing much on the expenditure bit, how much. It's about sharing the cake, not talking about baking the cake. Yes, baking it. That has been the challenge that we've had as a country. But increasingly, a lot of institutions and individuals are now concerned on the issues of taxation. And just coming to your question, I think, first of all, we need to start from where we are as a country. And I can say that over the years, KRA has been doing very well in terms of just collecting. If you start with I think the Kibaki era, where we started reforming the revenue system, we collecting below under $1 trillion in terms of revenue. But then it grew, and just looking at the figures, we've been able even to collect 1-point-something trillion, and the projections have been looking good. Now the challenge has been that we've not been able to, in most cases, to meet the target or to achieve that target of revenue collection, or the target set by Treasury and KRA. And the moment you are unable to meet the target, then it forces you to look for alternative sources of plugging in that budget. Remember, a budget, when you say we have a budget of 3 trillion, it doesn't mean that you have this money in a basket. You're just going to take it. We are relying on revenue, so that once we get revenue, you're able to finance that budget. So the moment you are unable to do that, then you have to either resort to domestic borrowing, or you go to external borrowing, and then you also have to look at other other avenues like grants and other sources of revenue to be able to plug in the budget. So that's where we've been as a country, and that has then brought in the aspect of how do we widen the tax net? How do we widen the tax bracket to be able to bring in quite a number of people?
Yeah.
And let me bring it into perspective in this matter. I was looking at statistics. When you talk about PYE, we only have 2.9 million Kenyans who are salaried. Those are the people who are able to pay the PYE. 2.9 million Kenyans. And you can look at the population of this country. So it means those people who are on wage and all that, they are not captured in the PYE kind of bracket.
Yeah.
Then two, when you look at, I think, was it last year, below 7.9 million Kenyans were able to file their returns. So we have a figure of 7 to 9 million who are on ITAX and able to file returns. Out of, if we talk about a population, and I like using the numbers for election. When 2017, looking at the registered voters, we had 19.6 million. So I like using that number for this kind of discussion.
Why?
So I like using it because of the fact that these are adults. If I assume that adults who are responsible, they're able to vote, they're able to pay their taxes, they're able to hold their
they're engaged.
Comfortable. They're engaged, then I like using 19. But it could be much more. It could be 20, it could be 21.
Yeah.
So if you take 9 out of that, you have 10 million Kenyans who are not paying taxes. And that means only a few or a small percentage of the country is shouldering the burden of the whole country.
Right. And then
that is the discussion.
Yeah. So given that's one issue, the tax base, there's a large section that's outside the tax base. But right now we are facing the COVID outbreak. And part of the pressure on government is how do we finance the budget? They have the finance bill, and they've also got some intentions to borrow, and maybe we can discuss the finance bill first. How is the finance bill drawing in this 10 million? And from a point of view of what we call tax justice, is it giving a fair burden on the various actors in the taxation process?
Hi.
Hi.
I think we're losing you.
Okay, are you hearing me now?
Yes, now that's better again.
Oh, great. I was saying before we come to the finance bill, recently we had the Tax Laws Amendment Act that was able to it instituted a number of tax reforms, and that was to be able to cushion Kenyans against the disruption that are caused by COVID-19. And when we look at the Tax Laws Amendment Act, one of the issues was to look at some of the tax heads that will ordinarily be captured under the finance bill.
Yep.
And we are looking at corporation tax, we are looking at PAYE, we are looking at VAT and all that. So the finance bill is building on that, building on the aspects or the issues that were raised or the reforms that came through the Tax Laws Amendment Act. If you can allow for like 2 minutes, I can just point out. One was the aspect of corporation tax, where we're able to reduce from 30% to 25%. And that, for me, it was one of, we can say, there's been debate around it when you compare with our peers. And I'm looking at South Africa, looking at Tanzania, Uganda, Ghana, Sub-Saharan Africa. Our corporation tax was 30, compared with South Africa was 20, 28, Tanzania 30, Uganda 30. There was also the reform of VAT. Ours was 16, compared with South Africa 14, Tanzania 18, Uganda 18. So you can see in terms of having that competitive edge, there was that clamor for that kind of reform. And now reducing corporation tax to 25% then makes it easier for us in terms of residential companies. But of course, there are also other effects to that. And as I come to the finance bill, and we are looking at, as we do all these, and including even the PAYE, we have other issues. As we speak now, a lot of, the one we're talking about cash flows for businesses already as we speak, and MSMEs. We are talking about hospitality industry, a lot of staff layoffs. We saw yesterday, Norfolk and quite a number of institutions under that sector.
Yep.
Transport sector already has a lot of challenges in terms of if it's public service vehicles, they are half capacity, air transport grounded.
Yep.
We're talking about individual incomes affected. So cumulatively, when you look at all these issues, they'll have on the bottom line. The bottom line here, we are looking at how much we'll raise based on the projections that we already given through the budget policy statement as well. Now, coming to the finance bill, the finance bill, as I said, is building on the Tax Laws Amendment Act 2020, which was enacted on 25th April. And one of the issues that they are focusing on is the aspect of digital service tax. And the digital service tax, we are looking at taxation of the digital economy.
What is that, actually, now that you've gotten there? Can you just explain what are they targeting to do? Charge you for using Facebook?
Yes. Let me explain. In Finance Act 2019, and just before that, we had a lot of discussions on the digital marketplace.
Yeah.
And we are looking at, we are talking about online transactions. If you are able to buy a book, maybe from Amazon, or using any other online transactions, are we able to tax? Are we able to get revenue from those kind of transactions? And that was really a very big challenge. So in 2019, we introduced that, but still there was no platform for us platform and guidelines for us to really effect that type of tax. In 2020 now, we've just come in strongly, and there's now the introduction of a digital service tax, which is 1.5% on the gross transaction value, so that anytime you are able to conduct any online transaction, then government is able to target that and generate additional revenue.
So basically, if you buy anything on Jumia, on Masoko, if you do anything on any of those platforms, now there'll be a tax.
So precisely, that's the thinking behind digital service tax.
On the consumer, however, or on the seller, on the buyer or on the seller.
On the buyer as well, because the seller, think about it this way, yeah? The seller is based in, let's say, Eric, you talked about Iceland.
Yep.
So if you are buying from an online platform in Iceland, then we have to pick we have to target the consumer because the service is in Kenya. So the moment the purchase is done by a resident in Kenya, then it attracts the digital service tax. However, we still do not have regulations. So we'll still, after this, we need to come up with regulations as a country and guidelines for implementation. Otherwise, without the guidelines, then we still have the gray areas on how do we go about in terms of implementing.
And very contentious areas, even in describing and definitions of online transactions.
Yes, it's a contentious issue. It needs a lot of debate and a lot of stakeholder input for us to be able to effect that. But hopefully that's one of areas because a lot of transactions are now going online, and that's one of the issues we are seeing in the new finance bill.
What are the other proposals in the finance bill? Because I think we can come back and speak to this specifically, but there are a number.
Yes.
Some of those proposals even negating what was enacted in April. What are the other proposals?
The other proposals we have, the bill proposes, by the way, to also repeal exemptions previously granted on income on home ownership savings plan. And here we are looking at the people who saved under that home ownership saving under the National Social Security Fund. And initially that was exempted in the Income Tax Act. But then this bill is repealing that. And majorly to get additional revenue. Again, there are challenges that as you do that, what happens to the guys the people who had already saved under that kind of under that scheme? Yeah. Again, there are issues around that. The other aspect that is coming in is the bill also proposes to tax bonuses, impose taxes on bonuses, overtime, and retirement benefits paid to employees whose taxable employment income maybe is at the lowest band. And when you look at this was a proposal in the tax laws amendment bill, but it was rejected by National Assembly. So it's being introduced again through the Finance Bill 2020. Again, we'll be keen to see what the National Assembly and the Finance and Planning Committee says on this, given that it was rejected earlier. But interestingly, there is a very good proposal on amnesty. There is now an introduction of an amnesty program, and we've had this clamor, a lot of discussions around it, that as a taxpayer you can ask for amnesty so that you are given a grace period to be able to pay tax, and this is now a good proposal that has been introduced in the finance bill.
I don't know whether
the other proposal.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Now,
Yes,
I was about to ask you, so I don't know whether you describe this as a very good proposal, the one where now the Treasury wants to start taxing loss-making entities.
Yes, that's the minimum tax. The minimum tax has already is implemented in Tanzania, in Angola, and some other countries, and they are saying there are those entities that are in perpetual loss-making situation. You are always a loss-making entity.
But you're in business.
So, but you're in business. You know that kind of engagement.
Yes.
You're in perpetual loss-making.
Yes.
And that is the essence of that particular proposal. That there is a minimum tax that you pay. Again, we look at what stakeholders say about that. I think it's a proposal that is worth looking at without throwing it out entirely. Because of what I said earlier in terms of either is it a scheme for you not to pay tax, or is it genuine that you are perpetually making loss? So that's something that we need to look at.
Elias, when we look at the scenario now, of course, government, I think with the April amendments, lost about 100 billion in revenue due to the tax changes that they felt were necessary to cushion businesses and taxpayers. Now, as we look at this finance bill, where is government proposing to make that money so that it can respond to COVID, but also, finance its business? And is this finance bill are these short-term measures, or are they strategic measures that government will continue to implement?
I'll say they are strategic measures, but just to start with your earlier question, one of them I said is the digital tax, service tax, and then we have other VAT-related amendments that, one, they are changing the status of VAT supplies, like from taxable to exempt. There is one that is also proposing to change from zero-rated to standard rate, and one that is being changed is the LPG, the liquefied petroleum gas, is moving from zero-rated to standard rate. That is aimed at also generating additional revenue. We are also looking at input and raw materials for some of electrical appliances, agricultural pest control. Of course, they'll have an impact on the households or the sectors that are affected, but government is looking at raising additional revenue from those particular. Yes, they are strategic, but as you all know, every year we have these the finance bill. Every year you are able to then relook.
Elias, we are losing you. You're not clear.
Yes.
I think we are losing you, Elias. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes, that's better.
So I was saying that one is the digital tax service, DST, digital service tax. We're able to raise revenue. There are also other VAT-related proposals, and I gave an example of LPG, that liquefied petroleum gas, which is moving from zero-rated to standard rate. Of course, that is aimed at raising revenue, but on the other hand, you can look at it from this angle. If we are pushing for green energy, we are pushing for conservation, then if this type of LPG, then people will then resort to maybe using other.
Let's take a break, take a look at weather and traffic, and then we'll see if we can get Elias for a couple more minutes on air. It's something wrong with his line, I think. But it's a situation with Kenya's biggest conversation. It's now 26 minutes after 8. Let's do weather, let's do traffic, let's see what's happening on the roads, and then we come back and look at the Finance Bill 2020 and the proposals that are contained in there. And if you'd like to join this conversation, you can call in 0719 012 600. That's 0719 012 600. I have a couple of questions, especially on those kind of things like introducing now tax on LPG or introducing tax on loss-making entities. Yes, it's happening in other countries. So what? Good morning. It's 27 past 8.
Mostly cloudy conditions at 17 degrees in Nairobi, 25 the high and lows of 12. And into Nyeri today at 17 degrees as well. We'll see a wet afternoon with highs of 23 and lows of 13. Taking a look then into Nakuru, where it's at 17 degrees currently, highs of 24 and lows of 13, and it's likely to be a wet afternoon. Eldoret at 22 the high today with lows of 12. We will see rain showers going into the weekend. Partly cloudy conditions in Kisumu at 21 degrees. We'll see highs of 28 and lows of 19. With showers expected in the afternoon. Kakamega has us at 19 degrees and partly cloudy, highs of 26 and lows of 16 with showers later on. Malindi at 28 degrees will be partly cloudy throughout the day with highs of 29. Mombasa at 27 degrees will be partly cloudy with highs of 30. And in Kampala today at 22 degrees, it's mostly cloudy this morning, going into an afternoon of rain with highs of 26 and lows of 19. It's going to be mostly cloudy in Dar es Salaam, highs of 31 and lows of 22. And in Johannesburg at 6 degrees, it's mostly sunny but quite chilly with highs of 18 and lows of 4. And finally for today in Lagos, clear skies at 24 degrees, highs of 32 and lows of 23. All right, let's see how things have changed on the roads this morning, and not much. It's not as crazy as we thought it was going to be today. Mombasa Road seems to be behaving very well, as is the Thika Superhighway today. Getting in and out of the CBD of Nairobi will not be too much of a pain, and the eastern and southern bypasses are opening up well. All right, let's take a quick look at Muthaiga coming out of that junction and then joining the Thika Superhighway. It is bumper to bumper, but it is moving quite well. Kiambu Road is also doing the same. So it's not too crazy a morning this Friday. In case it does change for you in your neck of the woods, let us know. Spice FMKE. That's how you can reach us on Twitter. And of course, let us know what you see.
The conversation continues. If you'd like to join the conversation, call our 0719-012-600. That's
Spice up your life.
012-600. If you'd like to ask any questions to Elias Wakisi, he's the manager of public policy and research.
Mature, intelligent talk.
Certified public accountants, and he's still on the line. Wanjiru, you wanted to raise a question?
Yes, the reason we wanted to have this conversation about the finance bill is how is government going to pay for the COVID needs? And so, Elias, we note there's a lot of detail, and we possibly don't have the time to get into a lot of detail. So our larger question is how is this bill going to assist government in raising money to respond to the shortfall it already has in revenue, and keeping in mind that Kenyans are sitting at home, so they are also financially impacted. Is this going to squeeze us more? So do you support the proposals in this finance bill to see us through COVID and to keep and not push Kenyans more into the red?
Thank you, Anjiro, and I hope you can hear me now.
It's better, yes.
Great. So as I was saying before we went for break, I was saying that there are quite a number of proposals, and I'd mentioned a few. The others I can share, one of them is I'd mentioned the bonus for low-income earners, and here we're talking about bonuses for overtime and retirement benefits. These will have an impact, of course, on the low-income earners. But as we earlier introduced, there's still this is one way of where government wants to raise revenue. The other way is the taxation of monthly pension for persons aged 65. I'd pointed out that this was in the tax laws amendment bill before Parliament. However, National Assembly rejected that proposal in the effect that these, in fact, are more vulnerable people, and of course, even with COVID, they are the more vulnerable in terms of the impact of COVID to them. Mm-hmm. So the proposal then removes the exemption. Initially, they were exempted under the Income Tax Act, but then bring them back into the tax net. The other proposal, I'd mentioned the aspect of home ownership scheme. And again, this was exempted earlier. It was introduced in the Tax Laws Amendment Act bill, again rejected. But National Treasury sees and care that these are another avenue that we can use to be able to raise revenue. The other aspects that we'll also touch on ordinary Kenyans, we are looking at member subscriptions. Like if you subscribe to a membership club, then those are also being targeted. We are looking at club subscriptions for paid up employees. Again, the bill is targeting to raise that and to be able to raise additional revenue. And I'd mentioned VAT. On VAT, I mentioned the aspect of liquefied petroleum gas. I mentioned aspect of raw materials for electrical appliances and LPG again. There are other aspects we are picking on excise duty, and excise duty again there is an increase in coverage for alcoholic beverages. As you all know, when we talk about alcoholic beverages, we are talking about sin tax. That in as much as we increase the taxation of that kind of element, still consumers will consume because it doesn't respond. It's seen as a luxury, and they are targeting. We are talking about spirits, liquors, we are talking about beer and cider. So the increasing coverage of alcoholic content in the finance bill. And lastly, we are talking about other aspects are mainly about administrative. Here they are targeting Tax Procedures Act, Kenya Revenue Act, like increasing the capacity or to provide training for its staff so that it's able to implement its role. So yes, as I said earlier, the finance bill is aimed at raising additional revenue in addition to what we had anticipated in terms of tax reforms in the Tax Laws Amendment Act. And as Wanjiru had put it earlier, the Tax Laws Amendment Act, through that, I think government will lose quite a number of resources. We are talking about PAYE losing approximately 50 billion in terms of revenue, and that has to be plugged. So in essence, it means that if we are not able to raise sufficient revenues to cover our budget, then one will resort to either domestic borrowing or external borrowing. But most importantly, the government has been talking about fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation here, we're talking about austerity measures, we're talking about revenue rationalization and reducing expenditures here and there to be able to match certain aspects and to be able to deliver, and especially delivering even on the big agenda. Of course, now that becomes a big challenge with COVID-19.
Now that you've brought us there, when we talk about, and you started by telling us, the budget is not that you have money in a basket and then you decide what you're going to do, is you start with a wish list on both sides. My wish is that I'm hoping to raise this amount of money, and I'm going to spend that amount of money this way. Now, then you are met with the reality. Are you going to be able to raise 2.7 trillion shillings so that you can spend 2.7 trillion shillings? Starting with the basics, that what you're talking about, there is now a reduction in the chances of you raising that much payee. And that was just talking about payee for those, the amount of money that you've reduced, assuming that everybody still retained a job. But the other reality is that many other people have also lost their jobs. So even the chances of getting payee from those that were earning 24,000 and above has also reduced. Then there's all the other realities. Must we still be having a budget of 2.7 trillion shillings? Why can't we just start with a lower budget? Go back to a trillion shillings, for instance.
I think that's what we need to do. And
Elias, your phone again.
Yes, you can hear me now?
Yes.
That has been the debate for quite some time, that our budget, we've been growing our budget for the last 5 years. We had 1.9, we moved to 2 trillion, we moved to 2.3. Last year we had 3 trillion, we are now talking about 2.7 trillion. I think it's high time for us to relook at that budget in lieu of what is happening with COVID-19. I've just retaken my figures. When you look at, as I said, PAYE, we lose like 19.8 billion because of the new changes.
Yep.
Corporation tax, we lose close to 45 billion. Turnover tax that was to cushion MSMEs and small and medium enterprises, we lose around 50 billion. The aspect of VAT from 16% to 14%, we lose another 49 billion.
Mm-hmm.
So it means cumulatively we are losing close to 120-something billion out of what was budgeted. So it makes sense for us to relook at our budget, cut some, we call them priority spending. We have to really relook at our budget, look at our expenditure, and look at some of the luxury expenditures that we've had as a country, so that we're able to really work within what we are able to raise.
So all of this, is it possible? Is it possible? I mean, we can talk about this and talk about what has been put down on paper and what has been drafted, but is it possible to actually get this done? Because one thing that we do know about COVID is that it is not a permanent state of affairs. Things will change as we probably move forward. So now all of these factors that are being put in place, is it possible to actually have it rolled out so it goes from being a bill to actually being action?
it's not possible like to reduce the budget for now, because as you all know, the budget starts way back in August of every year, so it's a long process. So where we'll have to take that budget through, and already it's before Parliament, before Finance and budget committees. They are looking at the budget, so it's not possible to really say you are reducing drastically from 2.7 to maybe 2.1. What we'll do, we might reduce to maybe 2.5 there, but then seek additional support from development partners. As we speak, I think IMF and World Bank have already given us close to 191 billion to be able to plug in any budget deficit. So definitely what we'll do is to look further into going back to the market, going to borrow to be able to finance our budget. But going forward from August this year, when we start a new cycle, we'll have then to take very deliberate steps in terms of relooking at our budget, in terms of relooking at our expenditure and looking at our priority areas, so that we're able to work within our means.
Elias, is what you're telling us then, our finance bill then is not realistic. It's not based on evidence and ability to pay. I still wanted to hear whether you think the measures being proposed are fair from a tax justice point of view. And then also we have a budget presently being debated in Parliament that is also not realistic. But maybe we can focus on the revenue side. We said we're looking at revenue side today. So the finance bill you're saying is not realistic.
For now, it's not realistic, because we are talking about the losses. What from individual income perspective?
Sorry, we can't hear you.
We are talking about losses both from individual income perspective.
Right.
We are talking about farms not being able to finance their expenditure. We are talking about global disruptions. Already we are talking about industries that rely on imported materials, for instance. They are not able to import and implement or run their activities. We are talking about business uncertainty and even reduced working hours. These have an impact on the overall revenue generation. We are talking about even the issues of slowdown in investments. Very few institutions are now investing because it is a wait and see approach. What will happen? How long will this pandemic drag on? We are talking about closure and even scaling down of operations of businesses and companies. So this will have an impact on the overall revenue, and that's why I said earlier that it is a bit unrealistic to in terms of raising some of those measures we put in place in the finance bill, because we don't have these businesses are not working, individuals are not working, and there are all these layoffs. So we'll have really to tighten our belt for us to be able to finance our budget.
So we see more borrowing on the horizon, or more attempts to borrow.
More borrowing, and more borrowing both domestically and externally.
Unless we can consolidate, rationalize ruthlessly.
We need to rationalize. In fact, we've had this program for fiscal consolidation for for the last 3 years. That's where we need to go now, to rationalize, to look at maybe travel, maybe look at issues around conferencing, look at issues around per diem. There are so many other things that we need to start.
Has it borne any fruits? Because we've had this conversation, like you say, we've had this conversation ongoing, and government doesn't seem able to stop spending on unnecessary things.
It hasn't borne any fruit, because we started last year. I think last year there was a circular by the CS in terms of introducing austerity measures, but it's not been able to bear any fruit. Hopefully, going on this year, we expect to maybe appropriation bill and any other instrument to be able to entrench more additional measures, and also to look at spending so that you can only spend on those projects. One, you can focus on the pending projects. For instance, there are those pending projects that were due for completion. That's one way you can go about it, so that you don't start any new project. That has been a clarion call by the president for quite some time, but that has not worked. We also look at maybe spending on pending bills, because we have like 13 billion out there owed to suppliers. Maybe if that is paid, then they can be able to work, they can be able to restart their businesses and to generate additional revenue. So there's a lot that we need to do in terms of supporting these small businesses, but also reducing on expenditure. The only challenge is that we hope that when you reduce, then service delivery won't suffer. The challenge will be suffering with the service delivery, so that citizens are not able to use services.
Is there any indication, Elias, we are now going to June? Is there any indication at all, anywhere in the horizon, that the government is about to change and start operating things differently? For example, you're saying, let's cut back on the excess fat. Let's not start new projects. Let's support the areas that need serious support. If you look at healthcare and ensuring that healthcare works, ensuring that the small businesses are supported, and actually getting that to work. Is there any sign in the horizon that this is likely to happen in the next financial year?
I can only say hopefully there is a change. Hopefully, because of COVID, we'll be able to reflect as a nation and think through that. The only challenge we're seeing a lot of, again, talking about going back to politicking, and I don't think that could be the issue. We need to change. And here we are looking at our parliament. If parliament can also do their oversight role so that they keep the government in check. So they say, hey, the way you are spending is not really sustainable. We need to look at these expenditures. We need to look at what are your priorities. And that has to cut across the entire government. We are looking at all ministries, all departments, all agencies, and even county government. We go even down there so that we prioritize service delivery. So hopefully, my view is hopefully we'll see light. Hopefully there will be a change in direction and focus on post-COVID recovery.
You be optimistic, Elias. You just be optimistic. When reality hits,
but I say
that's why we're encouraged to be a praying nation.
I said we hope and pray. We hope and pray that these things will change. But if it's business as usual, then we are in for a road show.
We're in for trouble.
We're in for trouble.
And then there was a question we also had. What's the implication of all of this? What's the situation with domestic debt? And is that a comfortable situation? Is that getting better? Is government eyeing that? Aziz Park, I know you've been very vocal on that because of the impact it has on businesses.
Yes. We are not getting better in terms of domestic debt. And we all know that the impact of domestic debt to private investments. When you look at previous figures, I think we are around 3-point-something trillion in terms of domestic debt. Here we're looking at borrowing from commercial banks. We are looking at treasury bills and bonds. And when you do that, you are able to. When you do that, you are siphoning the resources.
Sorry, we're losing you.
Yes, I was saying when you do that, when you increase domestic borrowing, the danger is the resources meant for private investments then are really taken up, and the private sector is in economics they call it crowding out. Is left out, and they are unable to borrow. It has a huge implication on that. And two, it's also likely to push up the interest rates in the economy, and because most of these domestic or internal debt, their maturity is normally shorter, and sometimes the interests are higher compared to external debt, and that makes the obligation on part of government to be a bit higher. So it's not really a good state to be in, and we hope that going forward that aspect won't be there.
Has government shown an intention to borrow domestically in its pronouncements around how to finance COVID and finance the budget moving forward?
That intention hasn't been there, but you just have when you look at the statistics, in fact, it is neck and neck when you compare domestic debt and public debt. Not public debt. When you compare domestic debt and external debt, they are more by February this year, our domestic debt was 3.0 trillion, external debt was 3.1 trillion. So they are neck and neck. You can't separate them and say the intention is now to go out. We've been, for the last 5 years, borrowing I think, at the same level, both domestically and externally. And going by those trends and by that statistic, then it means we'll still continue to borrow domestically as well.
Look at their character, and this is how they'll still do the same thing.
Hey,
Elias,
they still do the same thing.
Elias,
They still do the same thing.
I think you've spoilt our weekend,
They still do the same.
which is just
Neck and
really staying at home. But now we are staying at home with the thought that there is no plan, really. We don't have a realistic budget. We don't have a realistic finance bill. And our debt situation continues to be bad, and all indications are it will get worse. And I think maybe we need to tell government, get real, give us something that makes sense.
Yeah, and still hope and pray that they even listen to that.
To that one that makes sense.
Elias Wakisi, thank you very much for speaking to us.
The only challenge we've had, Eric, is we have, I can say, a docile population in terms of talking about the aspects of revenue. Most people talk about, they are able to speak about governance, they're able to, whenever there's an injustice, you'll see people rising up. But very few people come up strongly and say, we need to look at our finance.
Challenge goes to that institution that you work in, Elias. And I'm telling you this directly.
Eric is passing the buck, Elias. Don't agree.
Listen, the Institute of Public Accountants of Kenya, you guys have a role in educating us. When you come and start telling us about budget and tell us, like now 4.5 billion shillings, rationalization, you've got to break down this communication.
Majority of the people are not going to understand an iota of what you're saying. Think about the majority of the people for whom this makes a difference. They're not going to be able to understand what we're saying. So I think there is a shared responsibility in making this information palatable and understandable at the very basic unit to people.
Elias, I think as a country, we always point fingers, but as we sit here listening to you, professional sector, civil society, media, at least we are talking. And out of this, we have to ask ourselves, how do we communicate this better? Because actually the rain begins to beat us on the issues you're talking about. Not just the corruption. And in fact, they say there's more corruption on the revenue side than there is on domestic side. So it's
domestic side,
it's very possible people are paying taxes much more than what we see, but that is going into people's pockets. So, I am with you, Elias. You've spoiled my weekend. But maybe sometimes we need a bad weekend to realize things are bad. And we need to step up.
My weekend has not been spoiled.
Yeah, I didn't expect anything different. I didn't expect anything different.
Exactly the same. Elias Wakisi, thank you very much.
The reality of the situation.
Yeah.
Status quo maintained.
Status quo.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Elias.
Thank you.
0719-012-600, 0719-012-600. Are you with Wanjiru Gekonyo? Or are you you and I? What did you expect? Spice up your life. Every time there's the budget statement being read in Parliament, the following day you'll see the big four, the big tax and audit companies holding breakfast meetings, inviting the media. They talk. It's a boardroom
Spice
talk.
up your life.
Likes and likes are basically just discussing. What do you think? And hardly do I hear people coming out of that meeting saying this budget is the worst I've ever had. There's always been optimism. The government, if I
Spice up your life.
I could have done this and the other. But I see some positives in this and that. Year on, year in, year out, same story. Now, with the issue of whether that conversation happens in that boardroom and it's able to leave the boardroom and come to the people, so the people can understand and start participating and saying, so what does it mean when you lower VAT? What does it mean when you raise VAT? What does it mean when you propose that you're going to tax LPG and you have been zero rating LPG? What does that mean exactly? Those are the challenges. Now, because we have about 7 minutes, let's go to the phone lines because people are calling in left, right, and center. Lydia in Parklands. Good morning, Lydia.
Good morning, Spice FM. Thank you for your good knowledge program. I wanted to add during your conversation that the tax was increased on beer, on sodas, on cigarettes and water. Why should water be part of these things? Water is health. Have you seen during the drought, the cow, the goat, no water, it just collapses on the floor and dies. Now, is water a stupid drink? Water is a healthy drink.
Yeah.
So water should not be taxed in this recent tax that they did.
Thank you.
They even hired a company in Italy to prepare stamps for all these bottles to be stamped with that stamp. So that means buying things in advance. And this Italian company will be the eater of a big fee. So we are throwing money the wrong side.
Thank you, Lydia. Tony in Mombasa, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Good morning.
My weekend has just been spoiled.
Spoiled.
Tony, we are together. Go.
You know, what I've heard, I was trying to imagine if how the government plans its financial year, if I could literally replicate it in my own personal life.
Yep.
I think I'll be kicked out of my house. I'll sleep hungry. My wife will just walk away. But there's nothing that... okay, we have people who are technocrats and know what is supposed to be done. Unfortunately, it is the politicians who now determine, who are supposed to give the political will, goodwill. If we decide actually per diem, no traveling out. And if we really need to travel out, it is the minimum number of people who are supposed to go at the least number of days.
Yep.
But now we go a big contingent and no one follows up. No one. So there's this mentality, I think, we all, at my workplace, we go like, what can you do? Utadu.
Yeah.
And that is the mentality with all our leaders.
With government.
That's
so,
why, yes,
so Tony, so this is the Tony post-Elias conversation. Who was the Tony pre-Elias conversation? You don't sound like you're any different.
No. Me, I've just called right now post. We talked yesterday.
The weekend is spoiled. How was it before? What did you expect?
Before, okay, I knew maybe I was hoping that technocrats they will be able to convince the political leaders that actually this is what we are heading. And when you hear them, they already have plans. They've planned for the COVID. We can do this and that. But what are we hearing? We want to have a BBI very soon.
Yeah.
It's all politics.
Yep.
You hear nothing about the budget.
Paul Lebel.
Yes.
My brother.
Now when you come and hear like this, anyway, it's our Kenya.
Paul son. Just breathe in, breathe out.
Tony,
live in
it's
the
not
country.
our fight. Tony, we can do better. It's good to be disappointed because then it will make us angry and we will insist on things changing. We must not accept
our next
mediocrity
our next growth as a country is what to do next. That next
exactly
is what do we do? Do we go to town and just sit down on the pavement? Do we hire a lawyer, take these guys to court? What can we do?
Tony, one of the
now
things...
you see your weekend now is
Tony,
well spent.
Looking up.
I want to take Frank now.
Tony.
Frank is in Kisumu because we are coming to the top of the hour. Frank, good morning.
Good morning, Eric. How are you?
We're fine, thank you.
Say hi to the members of the panel.
Good morning.
I wanted to catch Elias because I have a single question I would have wished to ask him. Actually, I posted it on Twitter. I was asking him, if I was the president, I have reined in both the houses, the Senate and the Ile Ingine. I have the support of the major opposition party,
Mm-hmm.
and I appoint him the CS of finance,
Mm-hmm.
with all that knowledge and all that support I can master,
Mm-hmm.
would he be able to bring our external debt to zero?
Good question. Elias,
I would have wished him to respond to that.
he's listening. We'll actually tag him on Twitter so he can respond there
But
directly and also tell us.
I want to say that I am not a disappointed person after his talk, because I don't know why anybody would have expected any better. I did not expect better. I hear people talk about COVID fund and etc. It will be used to help poor people and those who have been affected. I can tell you for free that that money will not reach. If you hear the money reach anywhere, you can call me and tell me about it. We are not interested in doing good for this nation. The people in leadership position are not interested. And until that time that they get...
Okay.
Let's put us on hold.
Put us on hold in the middle of his own conversation. Coming to the top of the hour, today's proverb: the one against whom you're practicing divination surpasses you in being a diviner. Be careful. Watch. Good morning. This is A Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. It continues on Spice FM KE, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube.
All right, let's see how things may have changed on the road this morning. Unfortunately, somebody's had an accident on Gong Road. We had talked about the fact that it was moving quite smoothly and very little traffic. But this morning, somebody has decided to go a little faster than they should have been, and an accident, unfortunately. We're waiting for emergency services to clear that up. It's affecting now the little traffic that has built up, then going into the city centre. Mombasa Road and Thika Road have been behaving very well today. A little bit of a problem around Muthaiga, but that has been cleared up more or less. And it'll take you, not too long to get in and out of the city. Apart from that, traffic looks good all around, unless I'm seeing something that... or rather not seeing something that others are. And if that's the case, do let us know. Spice of MKE on Twitter.
This is The Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric.
What did you expect?
Yes, but that attitude is also escapism, because you're escaping the responsibility of Article 3, Defense of Constitution, Article 1. Sovereignty is vested in us. Democracy is
by
our
accepting
responsibility.
True.
So when you say, what do I expect? You're then saying, we have given up. We are at the hands of these political leaders.
Wajiro, I don't know why you're hearing
things. If that was the case, we would still be colonized.
You're hearing something and then twisting it.
That's exactly what you're doing.
What we are saying is, first of all, you're getting to this realization today. We have been in that realization for a while, all right? And now that we are together, now let's talk about the solution. The point is that we're trying to figure out, why is it that you're disappointed? You should have seen this. Just looking at, this is how the government has behaved. Last budget, the budget before that, domestic borrowing has been rising, external borrowing has been rising, expenditure has been going this way. talk about widening the tax bracket has happened. It has not come to fruition. All these things, rationalization of our budget has been talked about forever. These things are showing you that this is not going to change.
And the Finance Bill 2020
Let's
is
first of all
not
get
what
the-
was going to fix it.
Yes.
Like the Finance Bill 2020, we should have been able to see that was like putting a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage. It's not the answer. So to see some kind of disappointment and saying, oh, actually, I thought it was going to be a little bit different is a bit myopic in my view. It should have been that we say, these are not the issues that we're actually dealing with to sort out the problem. We should be dealing with the issues. And if we're not going to deal with the issues, then anybody who's disappointed by seeing this thing is not going to actually work, then I don't understand why you're upset.
You know,
Because we've not dealt with the problem, we've dealt with the symptoms.
Instead of focusing on my reaction or anyone's reaction, let's pick the reality. Every conversation we have should spur us towards a solution. And our solution is that we want an equitable Kenya, we want sustainable Kenya, we want to be able to work, save, and look forward to a better tomorrow. So being disappointed...
That's the desire. That's not the solution.
Being disappointed at the failures of government is a good thing, because that disappointment spurs us to action.
That's true.
So the point I'm making here is, let us not allow political misbehavior of the political class, because they're not displaying much leadership, to discourage us from being invested in our governance.
Nobody's discouraged.
Right.
Because
when, for instance,
you have
I'll
driven
tell you.
a car without brakes,
Let me tell you.
You've gone into a wall, and I'm telling you, but you saw yourself
The
getting
point
there.
I'm making.
It doesn't mean that I am not.
The question
sad
that
that you got
gentleman
there.
asked of Elias is symptomatic of this attitude that it's always like this. There is no way, even if Elias was made finance minister today, the debt could be zero in a year.
Yep.
So I think what we have to confront as we push for change, because we are still in the struggle of pushing for change, is that this thing is complex. You need to bite the issue that pertains to you and stay engaged. And you heard Kamodo say it. There is a lot of apathy. You heard Wangare say it. Why aren't citizens engaging? I think as Kenyans, we need to get out of this idea.
And you're the one who's getting into that place, by the way. We are not in that place.
You know, Eric, at
you're
some
the one
point,
who's saying that
if you really don't want me to speak, then I will.
Got to correct you, because you're taking
I am
the wrong
shutting my
idea.
mic for the next hour, because you're not letting me.
You're getting the wrong idea. The wrong idea here, and this is what we mean, is the fact that we are saying that what did you expect in terms of this is where we are. This is where we are. It doesn't mean that we have accepted. It doesn't mean that we are not as agitated as you are.
I am
we are all
totally agitated because I don't like arguing about irrelevancies.
And we are all
the fact of the
agitated.
point is, let's stop being trivial in discussing whether one is disappointed or not. Let us ask, where are we? We have a COVID outbreak there. We are being told that the finance bill is not coherent, is not realistic. We are being told our budget is not realistic.
Yep.
Government is telling us they are doing all this stuff, but the underlying issue, because what we were discussing is very boring, mundane, but this is the underlying. Government speaks, but this is what it does.
Mm-hmm.
And we're being told this is not in place.
Yep.
And then if you choose to then focus on me personally or somebody else personally, their reaction, then you're clouding the issue that we don't have the fundamentals, that we are actually being treated to PR. And I think the purpose of us discussing here is to discuss fundamentals, not discuss personalities, whether or
I don't think personalities have come into this. I think it is the fundamentals, and that's the thing. I think on both sides it's very clear. The fundamental on one side is that this is the fundamental. If we haven't accepted the fundamental, then we should not be surprised that any documentation that doesn't address those, or that the fact that those fundamentals are not being addressed, we shouldn't be surprised at the output that we're going to get. At the same time, the other side of it is that when we're looking towards solutions, the solution is in the fundamental. And I will say this till I'm blue in the face. It's in the details.
Which is?
The details, as you've just spoken about, the fundamentals. If we are not ready to deal with the fundamentals, then we should not be surprised if we don't get an output. What we're saying the same thing. It's just that on one side you say, okay, well, I hope this would have done something better for the people of Kenya. I hope this would have done something different from the country. But if we have not taken care of the basics, there is no way on God's green earth that is going to happen.
But then how do we add value if we sit here and state what everybody knows?
Does everybody know that?
So the point is, and the challenge I'm throwing to us as we engage with these experts, what we need to try and do is to tease out what can be done and to find what can be done. And I put it to you. And I brought out this point because Wandia Joya brought it out. As Kenyans, our education system does not train us to deal with complexities. And she said this is because it was a colonial education. And it was an education that was designed for us to take instructions. So, and in fact, when she was saying this, she was saying our leaders are the ones who are the biggest victims of this. So when they are confronted, sit in a boardroom, you're given complexities, they're like, it has to be simple. And I put it to you as Kenyans, we are all suffering from this. So as we sit here and engage with these experts, let us recognize, one, this thing is complex. We can't afford to throw up our hands and say this is the way it is, because if a generation before us lost their lives to fight for the Constitution, then this generation's responsibility is to make it work.
Okay.
And that's what's confronting us. So
very good. Now,
the point is, let us always tag the disappointment with a proactive.
Yes.
Yeah.
We have been in agreement from the very beginning.
Good. So let's hear the proactive.
Okay. Now the proactive is, this is what you said, the fundamentals. Now let's move the conversation a bit back to COVID and the handling of COVID and all the measures. So once the government confirmed that we have a first case of COVID-19 in the country, measures were put in place. Number one, we started talking about, let's check everybody who's arriving in the country from all our border points. Is it land border, air border, sea border? Restriction of movement was introduced afterwards. And then there's the issue of curfew and how the curfew has been managed, how the quarantine facilities have been managed, how the isolation centers have been managed. We have discussed this particular issue on this show very many times. From the first time the people were taken into government-mandated quarantine, actually, before people were taken to government-mandated quarantine, we talked about that whole idea of self-quarantine. People are arriving at the JKIA. People are signing a form that is asking them whether they've been to DRC and whether they've come into contact with somebody with Ebola. And that is informing the government on whether they have COVID-19 or not from China. And then they are told, go and self-quarantine. And the management of that, the follow-up to ensure that people have quarantined or not, was a discussion. And then we went into the government-mandated quarantine at own cost. Another issue arose, at own cost. Why at own cost? How is it being managed? How is it being handled? Beyond that, it went into now, no, the government shall foot the cost of quarantine, after realizing that people are running away from taking themselves to quarantine or to isolation. Now the government is saying that. When we spoke to George Kigoro yesterday of the Kenya Human Rights Commission, he was giving us a case where somebody is actually in quarantine at present, but they are being asked to pay for their quarantine. So the issue of management of this quarantine, as simple as it should be, has basically just become one big issue, one way or the other. The Human Rights Watch has, HRW has released a statement where it's looking at how the government has managed quarantine, and it's calling it quarantine conditions undermine rights. Now, this is from the human rights perspective. And it says, ensure access to healthcare, sanitation, and information. And we've discussed this in detail. Let's now talk to somebody who works at the Human Rights Watch, who understands these matters, in deeply and bigly, like we like saying. This is Otieno Nyanjom. Good morning, Otieno.
Good morning to you. It's actually Otieno Namwaya, not Otieno Nyanjom. Those are two different people.
Okay. Otieno Namwaya, thank you very much for joining us. So the statement that was released by HRW yesterday looks at the quarantine facilities and what has happened in these quarantine facilities, the issue of human rights in these quarantine facilities. You look up at how they have been managed and how maybe they have been mismanaged. What exactly is the thrust of this statement?
The thrust of our statement, which we issued jointly with the Kenya Human Rights Commission and Journalists for Justice, is that people are being forced into quarantine whose conditions are not healthy. And in many cases, we found that people could have been exposed to infection while in the quarantine facilities or while being transported there. And we found that even those who were later tested positive and were taken into isolation facilities, mostly in hospital wards, were not given adequate care or probably no care at all. And they were left in the ward to struggle with the disease on their own and probably overcome it on their own without any form of medical attention. So trust is that we are asking the government to relook at the way the facilities are being managed and the way the whole quarantining policy is being implemented, because before a few days after the quarantining started, the government itself issued some protocols that ought to be followed, either before somebody is admitted or after somebody has been admitted, what the conditions there need to be met, and what kind of assessment needs to be taken or to be done before somebody is admitted. However, this is not, the protocol itself is not being followed, and we found that to be very strange that the government itself can issue protocols that it doesn't follow.
So who's supposed to be enforcing these protocols, Otieno? Because it's good to hear they're there, but evidently there's a breakdown in terms of their enforcement. And also, is government reporting on these protocols as would be expected or required?
The first question is who is supposed to enforce? I think it is the Ministry of Health and the health officials who either supervise or manage these facilities. So the paradox there is that it is the same Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Health officials who drafted and published the protocol, who are supposed to implement it, but they don't implement it. For example, contrary to the protocol, some facilities were, actually most of the facilities were never cleaned and they were never fumigated, even after somebody from that facility had tested positive.
Mm-hmm.
Then in most of those facilities, the authorities did not implement or enforce the social distancing requirements. In those facilities, again, people are using shared cutlery, which actually the protocol says should not happen, but it was happening. In some of the facilities, people are not given bed linen. Where they were given, for 14 days, they were never washed or replaced. So even if we say there's no COVID, that condition alone of not cleaning or replacing the bed sheets for, say, 14 days is unhealthy. Many other infections can occur. The second part of the question was who reports? I didn't get the second part of the question.
Yes, if there are protocols, there's a presumption that there's responsibility assigned for the implementation. You're saying it's the Ministry of Health. Ministry of Health is huge. So it would be, I guess, useful to know who is responsible, let's say, at institutional level. And are these people then giving a report back? Or is government issuing a code of, these guidelines and then leave it at that? You know, if I work in an office, we have policies, but for those policies to be implemented, you then give them to this manager. You are the one who is responsible for
enforcement.
For implementing this thing. And every so often, you're going to give me a report with some kind of, So do you get a sense that this is happening, Otieno?
I think in the protocol itself, they state clearly that each facility, that is each quarantining facility, is supposed to appoint a team leader and a deputy team leader. So the team leaders are supposed to be responsible for the enforcement of the protocols.
I think this is what we saw as not happening, Otieno, because if we scrutinize this protocol much earlier on, and if it was just on quarantine facilities, we saw that there were certain things that were not actually taking place. And it's interesting because it is government quarantine protocol. That is somebody from the Ministry of Health who put this together. And then there was certain follow-up that needed to happen across centers, and this we're looking across the country. But then it was clear that within a very short time that the protocol essentially was not being followed. Right, there were certain things that were not happening because, like you say, we had people who then were eating all in the same place. Cutlery was not being sanitized, rooms were not being cleaned, water was not being provided, sanitizer was not being provided, and this was across board. Whether you want to look at what was a government facility or even private facilities, because then the protocol then had to be followed even in the private facilities, right? So then doesn't it then point to the fact that then the entire protocol then would be seemed to have failed if a particular component of it did not work?
Yes, it virtually failed because it was not just one particular component that did not work. I think many of the components did not work. They were never enforced. Let's take, you mentioned the private facilities. Let's take the private hotels. A number of people, because the presumption was that those who went to private facilities were probably treated better than those who went to government facilities. But we did talk to those people who went to private facilities, and we learned that on the first day that some people went to private facilities like Pride Inn, in particular, I'm sorry to mention a particular facility, they found that that facility had not been cleaned. So it was dusty all over. It felt like it had been neglected because the hotels had shut down and sent away staff for like 2 weeks before it started being used as a facility. And the requirement in the protocol was that before people are admitted, the facility needs to have been cleaned, fumigated, and most of the places sanitized, and the sanitizers provided for people who are arriving, and masks. Most of the facilities never provided masks. And those who did provided them like days into the quarantine. The ministry itself was supposed to do testing. According to the protocol, they were supposed to do testing the 5th day, which is surprising to me because I thought the testing should have happened the 1st or 2nd day. However, that never happened. Most of the testing happened on the 8th day. And then, yes.
So basically, there was failure of processes and also failure of follow-up. Let's continue this conversation after we take a short break, take a look at weather, and then the conversation continues. You're speaking with Otieno Namwaya. He is a senior researcher with Human Rights Watch. We are looking at the state of affairs at the quarantine facilities from the very beginning up to present. We'll also now come to present, what's happening in the quarantine centers. Now we know that quarantine is not only in Nairobi, it's actually now gone to the counties as well. Who's managing that? Say the same protocols being applied that were being applied earlier. And also, I think we'll also look at the isolation centers because there are people who are in isolation centers and is what's happening. Some of them are complaining. I was put into an isolation ward. There was tape put outside so that nobody could come in, and then I had to start complaining and to be moved out of there. It was a story in the Standard yesterday. Good morning, 22 minutes after 9. This is a Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation.
Sun speaking out in Nairobi, it's warming up as well. Still going to have partly cloudy conditions through most of the day today in Nairobi, highs of 25. Looking into Nyeri at 18 degrees, it will be a rainy afternoon, highs of 23. And in Nakuru at 18 degrees, it's mostly cloudy this morning. 24 degrees the high with showers expected later on. Eldoret at 18 degrees is partly cloudy, highs of 22 and lows of 12. In Kisumu at 23 degrees currently and partly cloudy. We will see rains later with highs of 28. And lows of 19. Kakamega is partly cloudy at 21 degrees. 26 the high and lows of 16 with showers in the afternoon. Malindi is partly cloudy at 18 degrees, highs of 30. and lows of 25. It's mostly sunny in Mombasa at 28 degrees, 29 the high and lows of 24. Take a look then into Kampala at 23 degrees, and it is mostly cloudy. However, that will change later when the rains come down. 26 the high and lows of 18. Dar es Salaam at 26 degrees is mostly cloudy at 20, and we'll see highs of 31 and lows of 22. It's warming up in Johannesburg now at 9 degrees and mostly sunny. It's going to drop down though later to lows of 3 and the maintain highs of 18. And in Lagos at 24 degrees, mostly sunny conditions, highs of 32 and lows of 24. Let's see if we can take a last look at what's happening in Europe. In Paris, it's sunny at 17, highs of 25 and lows of 12. London is clear skies at 12 degrees, highs of 22 and lows of 10. And we're going to finish things off for the weekend in New York, where at 21 degrees, it's quite foggy for the day. And it'll be a rainy day in the Big Apple with highs of 26 and lows of 21.
Human Rights Watch, looking at the state of affairs in quarantine facilities and isolation centers, looking at the state of affairs in how the government is implementing all the measures to fight COVID-19. Now, from a human rights angle, from a human rights perspective. Before we went into these breakouts, we were talking about the management of the quarantine facilities, and we had asked who's in charge of a quarantine center. So we started from the very basics, and you're saying according to the protocol, the people who are taken to quarantine should elect their own leadership, come up with their own sort of team leader. But then who does this team leader report to? Who does he liaise with? Who do they liaise with? Is it a public health official? Is it a medical doctor? Is it the head of that institution, maybe the headmaster or the hotel manager?
Yeah, and Otsiano, just adding on to that, where is this process breaking down? Because obviously protocols are issued, and I think from the ministry level, their expectation, and from the task force level, their intention is that these protocols be followed. But obviously it's breaking down somewhere. So to assist the process, again, stating that, the guidelines, the protocols aren't being adhered to is nothing new, because this has been said before. So I think what would help is to understand, so where is it breaking down? And obviously it's up to the ministry to make sure they are enforced, but as an organization that's gone in and studied, what are the pointed things you identified as the breakdown of the protocols, and what recommendations are you making? And to whom are you making them, so that we see a change, because people's lives are being impacted here. And yes, it's good for us to show solidarity and to plead their case, but also we want action. So where is it breaking down, and to whom are you directing this plea for action?
Well, that is the puzzle, because most of the people in the facilities who are saying that for quite some time after being taken in, they didn't know who to consult or who to go to whenever they wanted something or whenever they had a complaint. In many of the facilities, people started wondering on the third day that they had not been tested and wanted to be tested to know their status, because they were interacting freely and they didn't know who the other person is they're interacting with. And for like 5 days, they didn't know who they could call, who they could reach out to. So the first breakdown that we found was at the reporting stage, there was no clarity on who you can reach out to when there is an issue in the facility. And then after that, I think we didn't quite understand how the ministry was operating. Within the ministry itself, it looked like everything started and ended with the minister. It wasn't clear what other the staff in the ministry are doing and what their roles were in the enforcement. So for people...
Did you get to interview the government official side? Is there resistance, or is it a sense of lack of support? Is it sabotage? Is it incompetence? Did you get a sense of what the problem could be?
We did talk to frontline doctors, some of the doctors who are in charge of certain facilities. And what we found was a sense of frustration on their part as well. But we did reach out to the minister, Honorable Kagwe, and we reached out to him through various channels. One via his own phone, his WhatsApp, and also an official letter to the ministry to him, copied him via his personal email. And there was just no appetite for the ministry to respond. They never responded to us. And after we released our findings, we did share with the Honorable Kagwe directly on his WhatsApp and on his email, and his only response was that what we had published was utter rubbish, because they don't even have flights, but the report is not actually just about flights, but about the management of the facility. So there's a bit of arrogance on the part of the ministry, and some kind of don't care attitude. I think people are saying that even when they get an official to whom they can complain, either they were dismissed or there was some sort of threat used against them.
I think we saw a situation actually where people were honestly trying to come to terms with what was really going on. Such a thing has not happened in this country, and maybe points to certain irregularities that we see, COVID or not. And I think also this particular ministry then was brought to having to do some work finally, and to get some things done. But are we seeing something that could now shed light on how things should be done, and should be done even more when we want to now go to other sectors, of society? Because like I keep saying, COVID is going to come, and after some time we're not going to have quarantine centers or isolation centers anymore. That will become a thing of the past. However, we do have other areas where people's rights, protocol is not followed for certain things to be done. Is it not an opportunity for an audit to be done and say, look, this is the way we should be doing things at the very least?
It would be an opportunity if the government was willing to listen, but if you begin to encounter that kind of arrogance where people are not even listening, and we were telling them very basic things like, look, the facility should have been prepared even before you send people there, and they don't want to listen to that. I think we could only say this is a missed opportunity. Probably there are lessons to be learned, but we don't know whether the leadership has learned anything. If we were confronted with a similar situation, say 5 years from now, I don't think that will be any different. Consider that some of the very basic things that are done...
We're really struggling to hear you.
Let's try and get you on a different line, Otieno. As we take a short break, take a look at traffic, try and get you on a clearer line, because this one is, I think we're basically just losing you as we go on. Otieno Nemoya is a senior researcher with Human Rights Watch. They released a statement yesterday looking at what the status is in quarantine facilities from a human rights perspective. We are taking a short break at 28 minutes to 10 o'clock. Take a look at traffic and then come back with this conversation. And we'd like you to join in the conversation as well. 0719-012-600. What is it that we ought to now start pushing for so that there is better management of the quarantine and isolation centers countrywide? Good morning.
I don't think anything is going to change after this. Still slight hold up on Mombasa Road, but that's not really much of a problem right now. It looks like a good Friday morning as concerns traffic. I can't say the same for what the evening will look like today, but for now, you're in good books. I don't think that will change as to what we've seen right now. So Mombasa Road looks good. Thika Road as well. Not much in terms of bumper-to-bumper traffic. Getting into the CBD off of Ngong Road and Langata Road and out of Westlands is also looking pretty good as well. So it's a good morning for traffic. Spice of MKE, you can keep those coming in case you see something that we should spread the word about. But for now, it looks good.
Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise.
You're listening to Spice FM.
The research of Human Rights Watch. From that report that was released yesterday by Human Rights Watch, looking at their quarantine facilities, the state of affairs there, we have basically seen, and this is not new. We saw it throughout the process, and people who were in quarantine centers were coming to give their views, that there was a complete breakdown in how the quarantine centers were being managed, how the quarantine protocols were being implemented. And it's the same thing that Human Rights Watch is saying. There was a clear something was not working. And at some point, when Jiro asked you, Otieno, who exactly are you, who's responsible for this, and who is the Human Rights Watch asking to take action?
Like I mentioned, that everything looked like it was starting and ending with the minister.
Yes.
But if you're talking about government and who should take action, it would appear that the buck stops with the president, because there was supposed to be coordination between the Ministry of Finance, because it looked like some of the things were not happening because there was no money. Like in Kitty, in Nakuru, people didn't have bedding, and they didn't have water to drink or beds. Mm-hmm. And when they asked for water, they were told there's no money. Money has not been released. Mm-hmm. So it looked like the Ministry of Finance needed to be working closely with the Ministry of Health, but it looked like there was no coordination within government itself. Also, it looked like the Ministry of Interior, which was providing security, needed to understand what measures were required within the facilities, like the quarantining. But the police there looked like they didn't know that they are dealing with a contagious disease, and they needed to be more cautious and to help people to avoid infection. But the police were acting like they didn't know. So there was lack of coordination between the ministries responsible, which to me would suggest that there was lack of coordination at the very top of the government. And also the Ministry of Health, which was the one in charge, basically the one coordinating efforts. I think either they didn't know what to do, or they were impaired because of lack of leadership.
Yeah, well, these issues come out in our earlier conversations about the difficulty of coordination within government in this response. And I think it's coming out again in a very practical term. And what I'm also trying to process, Otsieno, is the fact that the minister was rebuffed your report and your findings. Because if I was sitting in a position where I've issued protocols and I'm getting a report that shows things aren't working, I'd be keen to find out why they're not working as opposed to rubbishing them. Yeah, and I do agree. It comes back to leadership. What's your next action? Because, this sounds like in 2 months' time, maybe when we are closing quarantine centers, or in 2 months' time we'll be at maybe the peak of infection. So there'll still be in 2 months' time, we can expect to have the same report. So what's your next course of action, Otsieno?
The report we issued 3 organizations, Kenya Human Rights Commission and Journalists for Justice. And our thinking is that probably we need to have a sit down with the government first before we consider other possibilities. But it is also something that is being discussed internally, whether it is possible to also facilitate some of the people who are basically violated in the facilities. And there are some who actually believe, and they credibly so believe, that they were infected within the facilities. And that was because of the carelessness of the managers of those facilities.
Yep.
What ought to be done is probably to facilitate them to be able to seek legal redress. But that is way after we have had discussions with the government to see what is being done to address. There's one sad story, by the way, which I need to tell, of a security officer of a facility that I will not name, because then I'll be disclosing his identity, who didn't know that there were guests coming in, and those guests were from many other countries. They had come from the airport. And he didn't know. He was just at the gate. And then everybody else in the facility took off, left the security officer to check in these guests, check their details, show them rooms. When he finished, he was told, now, you can't go home because you have interacted with those people. You have to be quarantined. And after he was taken in for quarantine, he had not been told. He tested positive. And after he tested positive, he couldn't pay the amount of money that was required at the end of when he finally recovered. And he was detained in that facility for an additional 6 days. So it is basically a violation after a violation from stage one
left,
up to
right,
the
and
end,
center.
if you look at the whole of it. And such people, if you look at it, those such people require some legal redress of sorts.
Maybe we could also point you to, because we spoke to somebody who was a security officer at Lenana School, who faced a similar kind of detriment. You know, they were working at Lenana School. Lenana School was converted into a quarantine facility. He tested positive, and then there's a whole contact tracing of who he had come into contact with. After going through the isolation, he was still being told he ought to pay. And, you know, these are the issues that were coming out of that whole process. And I think among the pressure that, you know, was coming out from such people is what led the government to realize we are basically also creating stigma with this COVID by even telling people that they ought to pay for everything around COVID. And I think one of the reasons why now we are seeing the government saying we shall foot the bill of quarantine and of isolation and treatment for COVID.
And if I can jump in. Sorry. No, go ahead, Otieno.
You wanted to say something about stigma?
I wanted to comment on two. I wanted to comment on two things: the stigma and the government's pledge eventually that will pay. On the stigma, I think a lot of the stigma came from health employees, Ministry of Health employees. The only people who didn't seem to be stigmatizing those who are either in quarantine or those who are in isolation were doctors. But a lot of the health facilities, the staff there either had not been sensitized or they were just scared. They were treating those in quarantine or in isolation as though they did not deserve to be alive. So in one case, which basically illustrates what was happening in most facilities, the staff would refuse to talk to the person in the isolation center. And yet they were supposed to provide food, and when they came with food, they dropped the food outside the door on the floor. Yet people had been told they should make sure they don't touch the floor or the wall because it could be infected. But they would drop the food on the floor, on the corridor, along the corridor where people are passing. And they would not tell the person that the food is outside, come and pick it. After they drop the food on the floor, they run away. And the person will not know for a very long time, like an hour or two later when they open the door, they discover food has been lying there for like an hour or two and it's cold. They had been told not to eat cold food, mostly eat warm food. But here it is a situation where food is regularly dropped at the door and people run away. There's nobody you can consult. When they call for food to be warmed up, people refuse to come because maybe the person has already touched the plate. These a lot of people that we talked to say that they were traumatized by this kind of treatment. When they came out, they were again treated by the same way, because once you're picked up, your neighbors know that you are picked up because you're possibly exposed.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with the community is that they don't know the difference between quarantine and isolation. So when you're quarantined,
you automatically have COVID, right?
You may test positive or negative.
Yeah.
But when you test positive, then you go into isolation.
Yes.
However, there are people who are taken into quarantine who never tested positive. When they come out, people don't want to even take their money. They can't buy anything within the locality, even food. And government has not addressed that issue.
You know, one of the things
then let's go to the issue of...
Sorry, go on, Otieno.
The issue of payment. Yeah, on the issue of payment, the government has pronounced itself and said they will pay. But the reality is that they don't seem to actually understand what the issues are. Because a lot of people, it's a very basic thing. They want to go in, they want to be tested, confirmed to be free, and treated like human beings, and then let go. However, the government, since it announced, it is saying that they are not paying for food. So people are being taken in forcibly, and they're being told, we are not giving you food until you pay 10,000 for food. Those who cannot pay 10,000, they are told, you have to tell your family to begin to bring you food. Now, that undermines the whole idea of quarantining. Because then you're now exposing the whole family who have to regularly come to this facility to bring food.
Have you considered Otieno, there's a coalition in Parliament of human rights members of Parliament, and unfortunately, the late Ken Okoth was the chair, and a very dynamic chair. But it's quite a vibrant committee, because from what you're saying, immediately there's two big gaps that aren't adding up for me. One is health is a county level function, so you would expect that these centers actually have, close level of supervision
by the county
by
government.
the counties.
Yeah.
Why isn't it happening?
Yeah.
Could it be, as Kamodo was saying, that national government has centralized and is setting up isolation centers without the coordination of the counties at the local level? Who are the people
who's setting up the isolation centers at county level?
Would they not be county staff? And if they are county staff, they'd be under. So is it the counties that are mismanaging? What's this breakdown? And then the other is, where are the members of parliament? Because every isolation center, every quarantine center is in a constituency. What on earth are they doing? Have they isolated themselves as well? I am just aghast.
They're getting kicked out of committees.
They're doing politics. Oh yes, I forget. Bigger business. Because it's great to say that legal action will be taken, but lives are being impacted right now, and people are still earning salaries, and they're supposed to be working for the people. This is what we were discussing before about how we're going to raise money to pay those salaries, and these people aren't working for the guys who are affected. So I hope, as a strategy, the trio of organizations will consider putting pressure on the institutions, beyond the minister.
Yeah.
Those institutions.
Yeah, that is true. I think whether the county governments were failing, it would be difficult to tell, because it looks like in most county governments, the assumption was that the central government was in charge, and therefore they took either a backseat or just a supportive role. There was a facility that was identified in Busia where that lady with her child was being admitted. And I think the county government was supposed to be responsible for providing security and medical support, medical personnel. But what surprised us when we checked into that facility was that other than the security guards at the gate of that facility, there was no one else available for people who had been quarantined, whom they can reach out to. Assuming they fall sick, there was no health personnel.
Yeah.
There was nobody from either the kitchen or support staff. It was just the security guard, 2 security guards at the gate itself, and somebody is quarantined there and is alone there the whole night and the whole day, and they have nobody they can revert to. Who do we blame for that? Is it county government or is it the national government? I think there's more of responsibility that the national government should assume, because when they identify such a facility that they are going to be taking people there, they also need to be to ensure that the requirements are met, the standards are met. The government wasn't ensuring; they were just declaring this facility is going to be a quarantine center, and they don't follow up. They just throw people in there.
Yeah. It's emergency response committee. That whole structure, because there's a structure that is responding to COVID-19 that goes all the way to county and village level. And the emergency response committee has Council of Governors representation in the name of Isiolo Governor Mohamed Kuti. And he's also now the one who's helping to coordinate at the county level. But also the task force also has members of counties. It has CECs from counties. It has other organizations. I think the entire, coordination of the COVID-19 response is the one that has those many loopholes. And it starts from that point of the National Emergency Response Committee, chaired by Mutahi Kagwe. It has all the other coordinating ministries are present. The Ministry of Interior and Coordination of National Government sits in that committee. The PS sits in the task force. All these people, it basically means that even when you're talking about an isolation center or quarantine facility being set up at county level, it's the governor who's in charge, but they are coordinating all the way to the very top with NAC.
So something's not working.
It's
and
not.
City brought this out yesterday. I
and
don't know
he's
whether
on the
his
line.
solution. Yeah, I don't know. I hope he's heard this.
City, you've heard what we are hearing from Otieno Namwaya in terms of their research around the country and management of quarantine. Basically, the mismanagement that we saw in Nairobi has been devolved.
Actually, it hasn't devolved. It has metamorphosized into a monster.
That's exactly right.
Something bigger.
By the way,
Much bigger.
Yes, Atieno.
Okay, CT, carry
All
on.
right, we have lost Atieno. Yeah. CT, go ahead.
Yesterday there was a point I was trying to make and I actually didn't make it well. Remember when I talked about merging 2 ministries, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Internal Security?
Yeah.
What I was thinking about was this. When you look at the issue of COVID, remember, it's not the disease that is our problem if you think about it. It is the things around it. Like now we're talking about the things around COVID. We're not talking about isolation centers. We are talking about quarantine. When you have a situation where there is now poverty staring at us, you have a situation where unemployment is increasing. You no longer have a health problem, you have a security problem. And if you have a security problem and you're not addressing it before it sort of like gets out of hand, then you will have a situation that is much worse than the situation that Otieno was explaining. And this time around, why it will be terrible is because, one, most times when we've had a situation where people are going on strike in large numbers or there's a political impasse, we know that ODM is behind it.
And this time?
This time, there's no one to point fingers to.
It will be a mixture of many individuals whose same problem is that they have an issue, but there is no centralized leadership.
Yeah.
So it becomes very, very difficult to manage. It looks like we're talking about something that is far-fetched. But the truth, what is far-fetched is how the government can actually demonstrate its ineffectiveness when we know very well it has the capacity to do what was required.
I agree with you, CT. And I take no pride in saying this, but we spent 6 to 7 a.m. yesterday, again arguing. And the thrust of my argument was that this government has displaced abject incompetence and inability to manage the bureaucracy. And this is an example of that. The ability to deploy officers and to get them to do what they are supposed to do seems to be something that this administration can't do. And now it seems to be at the national level and even at the county level. But I don't know where that leaves us. If you're facing an incompetent government and lives are being lost, we don't really have the luxury to keep pointing fingers. What do we do?
What's the way out?
What's our role, our little contribution to this process?
I think we're in the process of actually putting in place our role. You see, people may get tired of us speaking of COVID, but every problem that bedevils us at the moment, you'll find, is around COVID. If you talk about health issues in the country, it's COVID.
Yep.
If you talk about, again, unemployment, it is COVID. If you talk about uncertainty and people being insecure, it is COVID.
Yep.
If you talk about an increase in crime in certain places, it is COVID. So, COVID is at the center of literally everything that we're talking about. And yet, we have massive committees. In fact, there are so many, I actually get confused. But, when you ask yourself, okay, we are told money has been spent. We are told there are committees. So, you ask the simple question, all right? These wonderful committees that we have set up, what's the achievement so far? And then you hit a very strong stone wall.
Yep.
You can't be told.
Yep.
Remember there was that Harambe committee which was set up.
It's still there. It's
You're
collecting.
saying remember it like it's no longer in existence. It is actually still there.
No. I say remember because I don't recall a situation where I have been told or updated of the things they're
On
doing
what
on a
they've
daily
been doing,
basis
right?
Or on a weekly basis.
Let me tell you, City, last week on Friday, the CS for Health, Mutahi Kagwe, was appealing to that committee to come to their aid. That means that even he hasn't interacted or engaged with that committee yet.
That committee,
In the media.
Yes.
It seems to be self-fulfilling.
To get money from the committee.
Yep.
I don't know. This seems to be rocket science.
No, it's
rocket science.
But
It's
even
either that
I
or
keep saying
stones.
even somebody studied rocket science and passed. So
Get them in the room.
maybe those are the ones that we need to come and help.
That's why Kenyans pick up stones and throw them because they're like, hii kitu ni ngumu.
Like we've said many times, I think what COVID-19 is showing is not just about one administration. It's showing what our civil service, our public service has become. Over many years, our public service is exposed to a level where we can now see our public service does not get instructions properly. Our public service is not motivated to do what it's supposed to do, because the person who is a public health officer supposed to manage operations of a certain isolation or quarantine facility, that person is a public servant. That person has received this protocol. I'm sure they have it somewhere. That person knows that they're supposed to be reporting to this quarantine facility, managing the quarantine facility, sharing information with people in quarantine. But for some reason, they don't do it. And they are not put to account by anybody.
But I'll
About
agree.
What do they know that we? But what do they know that we don't know?
I'll agree with what Otsieno observed, and I was reading something, a commentary again on Trump, because they have equal kind of level of dysfunction at the top. You have systems, and yes, we have been under a process of systemic reforms for ages, but then you have leadership, and leadership is what makes systems work. So if you have public service that's not delivering for us, you don't go blame, especially if it's across the board or widespread. Then you have to look up. If you have a situation where you have, more or less good service delivery, but then you've got pockets of malfunction, then you can say it's localized. But here, there's a lack of leadership, and I think you pointed to it. The president is distracted. He's busy doing politics he doesn't realize his biggest battle is COVID, that he can manage Ruto much easier than he can manage COVID.
Is it possible, Jiro, that the system has a problem?
When
This
you appoint
system.
an executive authority, the executive authority of the president, in a time of emergency, the buck stops with him.
True.
So his full concentration should be on COVID. We know it's not, and it's coming, and it's being evidenced. I think he put in place structures he thought they would work instead of monitoring and ensuring they're working. It's not. I think there's also a problem of dialogue and cooperation. And then I think the third between national and county level, and the third level is that money. That money doesn't seem to be going to where it's needed. At the end of the day, the buck stops with the president. When you ask for votes and you get the votes, however you get them, as long as you've been sworn in, then the buck stops with you, especially when you're having repeated and recurrent and widespread reports of failure of the system.
Yeah. Responsibility is bestowed on you, and we expect that you deliver. That's for sure. As we come to the end of the show and the end of the week, CT Muga and Ndu Oko and Wanjiro Gekonyo. Wanjiro, give us your thoughts of the week going into the weekend.
I still hold. I will. My weekend has been spoilt by this program. I'd hoped we'd end on a high note, but we picked very heavy topics that are showing how far we are from where we want to be. But I will say hope springs eternal. I'm sure I'll find some inspiration to start the week on a more positive note. Yeah. But a luta continua. The struggle continues.
Good. There speaks the freedom fighter.
Yeah, have a good weekend.
Not by choice.
Sure. And please, whatever you do, don't get it.
Okay. City?
Hii inahitaji maombi.
Siku 3 kama Tanzania.
No, I don't know, you are Tanzania, sijua wale jamaa, everybody seems to speak, but in all honesty, hii inahitaji maombi. It's something that is truly, when you see it for what it is, it's beyond shocking.
COVID or the non-response or
the presidency or
inaitwa the situation.
Okay.
Tumekuelewa.
Mahali tumefika.
Tumeelewa.
Thank you very much, City. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for tuning in to The Situation Room this week. Join us again next week, Monday to Friday, every morning, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. The Situation Room continues from now until 2 p.m. You have uninterrupted music, sugar and spice, and everything nice. And then from 2 to 6 p.m., you'll have Monique taking you home on Spice Drive. From 7 to 10, the adults in the room will be here. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock.